Chapter 677. Ning Ke flew toward the light with Sang Sang in his arms. They had been flying for a long time and the people on the ground of the wilderness had almost become black dots. The big black horse was almost out of sight. They were very far from the ground. Logically speaking, nothing could fly here except for flying swords or arrows. It was impossible for someone to reach into the sky and grab his feet, unless that person was very tall. Ning Ke and Sang Sang passed through the golden dragon's breath and landed gently on the ground of the wilderness. He held Sang Sang in his arms and looked up. He found that the figure in front of him was indeed very tall. The man looked at Ning Ke and Sang Sang with his back to the sky and the giant golden dragon. His face was shrouded in darkness and could not be seen clearly. The edge of his body seemed to be plated with a golden light and seemed to be burning. The man stood on the ground of the wilderness and his tall figure seemed to touch the sky. The man said with a smile, "The choice itself is not necessarily meaningful. But sometimes, our choices can affect the choices of others. That will make things interesting." Ning Ke had a conversation with a tall man in the illusion of climbing the mountain on the second floor of the academy. At that time, he did not see the man's face clearly. Between light and darkness, which side will you choose? Why should I choose? How did you choose before? My body is in the darkness, but my heart is in the light. I did not expect to see a wild grass swaying in the wind on the wall after so many years. You see, I said it was not a must to choose. But what if the sky falls? How can the sky fall? What if? Naturally, there will be someone tall enough to handle it, for example, you. After climbing the mountain in the academy, Ning Ke found out who the tall man was. Many years later, in the wilderness where the dream became reality, he found that what he said was so accurate. Even if the sky falls, so what? There would always be someone taller, for example, someone as tall as the teacher. Ning Ke knelt in front of the tall figure and said respectfully, "Headmaster, you are here." "Well, after thinking about it, I still can't figure it out, so I came." The headmaster looked up at the bright light in the sky and the fading night. He left a shade on the wilderness with his body, covering Ning Ke and Sang Sang. His black cloak fluttered in the wind as if it was about to burn. "I've thought about it for more than 1,000 years. Which side should I stand on in the war between light and darkness? The problem is that I've never seen Yama and I have no friendship with him. I don't like the cold. I don't like the quiet and boring world that Buddha saw. I don't like Haotian either. I even hate it." The headmaster said, "That's why I've always wanted to be an opportunist. All these years, I have been asking you which way you will go, but in fact, I am also asking myself which way I should go. That year, when I asked you in my dream, you said that you also wanted to be a fence-sitter, which really comforted me. It turns out that not choosing is more important. Unfortunately, it's not that easy to be a fence-sitter. A gust of wind can recognize the sturdy grass, but it can also break the sturdy grass." Ning Ke looked at the headmaster and said worriedly, "But you still made a choice." The headmaster looked at Sang Sang and said calmly, "Maybe my choice will eventually be proven wrong. But at least for now, I want to choose this way, so I will choose this way." Ning Ke didn't know what to say. He was very touched and inexplicably sad. He was happy that he had his headmaster and that he and Sang Sang were still alive. But he began to worry about how the headmaster would face the anger of Haotian. The headmaster looked at him and smiled. He continued, "Not choosing is indeed a kind of freedom. But if you don't dare to choose because you are timid, then it is not freedom. Making a choice may not necessarily be meaningful, but it may be meaningful. The reason we live in the human world is not to have meaning, but to have fun." The words in this passage were simple, but they carried a deep meaning. Ning Ke didn't need to think much to understand what the headmaster wanted to say. Because he was a student of the academy, meaning was the goal, and meaning was the process. The academy didn't care about the goal, only the process. Back then, youngest uncle held a sword and wanted to fight with heaven. It was probably because he thought it was very interesting. The power of light suppressed the human world. Countless people knelt on the ground, not daring to look directly at the sky. They prayed silently in awe. Anyone who dared to stand had died or was about to die. However, in the brightest place in the wilderness, there stood a tall man, using his figure to protect the daughter of Yama. This was a challenge to the dignity of Haotian's divine kingdom. It was an unforgivable blasphemy. The giant golden dragon's calm and indifferent eyes burned with fury. A distant and solemn dragon roar reverberated through the heavens and earth once again, followed by a terrifyingly powerful dragon breath. Countless blazing divine halos mixed with crystal-clear golden sand shot out from the dragon's head high up in the sky and attacked the ground of the wilderness. The power contained in this dragon's breath was even greater than before. Wherever it passed, the air began to burn. A golden and white shadow appeared on the surface of the wilderness. Ning Ke looked over the headmaster's shoulder and saw the strange and shocking scene in the sky. He looked at the endless dragon breath with fire and light, and his expression changed slightly. He shouted, "Be careful, headmaster." The headmaster did not turn around. His back was still facing the sky. The golden sand fell from the sky and came behind him. Then, it disappeared without a trace. The light and heat between the golden sand disappeared as well, as if nothing had happened. There seemed to be a lake behind the headmaster, a hot lake that was about to erupt. There was a sea, the hot sea before the cold region of the far north froze. The dragon breath was like countless ice cubes that were thrown into the hot sea and melted instantly. All the golden dragon breath that attacked the headmaster was turned into the finest particles of the world by an invisible force. They melted into this world. This was purification. This scene looked simple, but it was very strange. No one could understand that the dragon breath, which was the purest Haotian divine light and could purify everything in the world, could be purified. Even cultivators who surpassed the 5 states could create their own rules in Haotian's world and have their own world. However, they could not ignore Haotian's rules in Haotian's world. How did the headmaster do it? The people on the wilderness were all kneeling. No one dared to look up at the bright sky, but they could see what was happening on the wilderness. They saw the headmaster appear, saw the giant golden dragon spit dragon's breath at the headmaster, and saw the terrifying dragon's breath that no human could resist disappear. Looking at this scene, everyone was shocked to the extreme, to the point that they were unwilling to believe their own eyes, and those who firmly believed that they were not mistaken began to doubt this world. The hierarch of the divine hall held the divine staff in his hand and knelt on the ground. His figure was still tall, but at this moment, his figure trembled violently. Compared to the tall figure in the wilderness, he seemed so small, so weak, and so lowly. The great divine priest of revelation looked at the scene in the wilderness. The deep wrinkles on his face were twisted in shock. The blood and golden powder in his eyes were peeling off. He murmured, "What state is this?" The dragon breath was futile and was even purified. The giant golden dragon's eyes revealed extremely complicated emotions. The dragon's body suddenly tightened. This time, it was no longer a distant and majestic dragon roar, but a violent and angry dragon roar. A strong hurricane roared in the wilderness. Countless black soil and grass were swept up. Smoke and dust filled the air and gradually obscured one's vision. It seemed to be darker than the previous night in the north. The giant golden dragon roared and angrily and laboriously squeezed its body out of the clouds. A golden rope dozens of feet thick was tied to the dragon's body. The golden rope was extremely tight, as if it was dragging a heavy object. After a while, a chariot made of pure gold, pulled by the giant golden dragon, gradually drove out of the clouds and appeared in the sky of the human world. The golden chariot was extremely huge. If it landed on the ground, the entire Chang and would not be able to contain it. The gold was not the gold of the human world. It was so pure and transparent, and its entire body was bright. The sky was bright, and the smoke and dust on the wilderness suddenly disappeared. It was as white as snow that had fallen for dozens of days. The space began to shake, and the earth began to shake. A divine general stood on the golden chariot. This divine general wore armor condensed from Haotian's divine flame. He was extremely tall, like a mountain. Compared to him, the stone statue of Buddha that once stood on Tile Mountain was like a small stone man. This divine general's face was extremely perfect. He had a natural grace and no flaws could be found. Compared to him, Prince Long Qing, who was once known as the West Hill handsome son of God, was like a beggar. This divine general's expression was extremely cold. His eyes emitted a blazing white divine light. He was completely emotionless. He stood in the chariot and looked down at the human world. Wherever his eyes touched, nothingness would disappear. Other than the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple, the Taoist in Indigo on the South Sea, and a few people in the anthill behind the Jishou Abbey, no one in the human world could see the golden chariot and the divine general on it. Ning Ke sat in the figure of the headmaster with Sang Sang in his arms. He wore a pair of sunglasses. Although his eyes were stinging, he still opened his eyes wide to look at the scene in the sky. He was shocked, speechless. He knew that the headmaster was very powerful. However, facing the anger of Haotian's divine kingdom, facing a divine general who was as tall as a mountain, and whose eyes were filled with Haotian's divine light, even the headmaster could not deal with it. The headmaster turned to look at the golden chariot that was being pulled by the giant golden dragon. He looked at the perfect divine general of light on the chariot and the perfect face of the divine general. He suddenly shook his head. There is nothing perfect in the world. There are only things that we think are perfect. The headmaster put his hands behind his back and looked at the divine general of light in the sky. He said, "Your perfection comes from thousands of old friends. Therefore, you are not a human, and you are not those old friends." The divine general of light was indifferent. He ordered the giant golden dragon to pull the golden chariot down from the sky. A light sword that was more than 10 miles long appeared in his hand. He slashed at the wilderness. You come from Haotian's divine kingdom and use the divine sword of light. If you only use light, you will lack truth, just like your existence. Today, I will show you the sword of the human world. The headmaster said. He stretched out his right hand in the air and opened it, facing the south of the human world. The clouds broke and the sky darkened. A sword came from thousands of miles away from the south. The sword was ancient and hot. It broke through the clouds and landed in the headmaster's broad palm. It hummed slightly, showing its submission and awe, as well as the pride of being controlled by the headmaster. This is the 4th chapter. Damn it, I have to write another chapter. While it is interesting, I will try to come out before 10:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 678. In the past few decades, the headmaster had never fought. He was gradually forgotten by the people. Even the people in the cultivation world would occasionally forget about his existence. In the legends that only a few people knew, the headmaster's weapon was a stick. Ning Ke had painfully confirmed that the headmaster's weapon was indeed a stick. The headmaster did not use a sword. Since he wanted to let the divine general of light in the sky see the sword of the human world, he could only borrow a sword. He reached out to the south and a sword flew towards him. The ancient sword came from the sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom. The sage of sword, Lu Bai, sat cross-legged by the lake. He looked at the dried water in front of him and thought of the ancient sword that flew out of the lake. He was silent and had a complicated expression on his face. Lu Bai was very weak and tired. He had meditated by the lake for many years to cultivate a real sword. That sword contained all of his sword style and spirit. In other words, that sword was himself. That was why it was the strongest sword in the world. Now that the ancient sword left the lake, his sword style and spirit left with it. Naturally, he was weak. However, there was no anger on Lu Bai's face. Instead, he looked confused. He was the most powerful person in the world. His swordsmanship was unparalleled, but someone could take his sword from thousands of miles away. He did not even have the right to object, let alone stop it. After a while, Lu Bai's confused expression turned into slight excitement. He had already sensed whose hands the sword had fallen into. He felt honored and proud just like the sword. The ancient sword came from thousands of miles away and landed in the hands of the headmaster. The headmaster's feet left the ground of the wilderness and floated up into the sky. His black robe whistled in the wind and reflected the light in the sky. It turned the holy and hot Haotian divine light into countless pieces of gold. Ning Ke held Sang Sang in his arms and looked at the sky. His face was full of shock. The headmaster finally made his move. He danced in the sky. In his opinion, this battle was destined to be recorded in history and even become a legend. It was bound to be magical and dangerous. It might even last for 3 days and 3 nights or even years. He only hoped that the headmaster could win and be safe. What he didn't expect was that this battle was completely different from what he had imagined. It started quickly and ended quickly as well. It was very simple. The headmaster's black robe fluttered in the wind. He was already above the blue sky. He looked at the light and darkness in the sky and casually waved the ancient human sword in his hand. A sword mark suddenly appeared between the extremely brilliant light and the gradually declining veil of night. The sword mark was extremely deep to the point it seemed as if it wanted to pierce through the sky, and it was like a deep trench that separated light and darkness. The headmaster's first sword, heaven cleaving. The divine general of light stood on the golden chariot, his face emotionless. The light sword in his hand, which was more than 10 miles long, slashed at the ground of the wilderness. The blade, which was dozens of feet wide, pressed down on the headmaster's body like a mountain. Compared to the giant golden dragon, the golden chariot, and the divine warrior of light in the sky, the headmaster, who was especially tall among mortals, looked like a speck of dust floating in the air. Compared to the terrifyingly huge sword of light, the human sword in his hand was like a tiny hair. The headmaster raised the sword of the world in his hand and faced the light sword. When the sword of the world and the light sword touched, it was like a tiny hair that lightly brushed on Tianqi Mountain. The tiny hair was unscathed, but the mountain collapsed. The light sword suddenly shattered like an avalanche, scattering in all directions of the wasteland. The sword style in the headmaster's hand did not stop, as if it would never stop. It pierced through the hundreds of thousands of light sword fragments and attacked the golden chariot, landing on the face of the divine general of light. There was an extremely tiny sword mark on the divine general of light's perfect face, so it was no longer perfect. The emotionless and emotionless face became somewhat comical because it was no longer perfect. Crack, 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 crack. A series of extremely subtle sounds rang out. There were hundreds of thousands of cracks on the face of the divine general of light. Those cracks spread to his majestic body, and the armor that was formed by Haotian's divine light also began to crack. The divine general of light was like an ice sculpture, instantly shattering into countless transparent crystals. They rustled and fell to the ground of the wilderness. It was like a hail, but the sound was more like a rainstorm hitting the eaves. Those fine transparent crystals still contained the terrifying divine light and divine power, but they could no longer combine into one and pose any threat to the headmaster who was holding the sword of the world. The fragments of the divine general of light and the light sword continuously fell on the ground of the wilderness, like a dense meteorite rain. They fell with fiery tails, splashing smoke and igniting countless blazing flames. On the wilderness, countless people rolled in pain in the divine light and then died, turning into green smoke and nothingness. The divine general of light, who was looking down on the world indifferently a moment ago, also turned into green smoke and died. The headmaster's second stroke, God slaying. The headmaster flew against the wind and went straight to the place where the light was the brightest. He stood on the head of the giant golden dragon. The giant golden dragon roared angrily and swung its tail. The clouds scattered and thunder roared. The headmaster still stood on its head, his black cloak fluttering in the strong wind. The giant golden dragon turned back to bite, and the headmaster's sword fell. It was unknown whether the headmaster had become extremely tall or the giant golden dragon had shrunk under his feet. The sword of the world in his hand pierced the giant golden dragon's neck and went extremely deep. The giant golden dragon screamed and struggled with all its might. The headmaster's sword moved around the dragon's neck, and pieces of dragon scales fell off. The giant golden dragon was in more pain and struggled more intensely. It flew and rolled in the sky at high speed. Clouds and lightning formed around its body, but it could not get rid of the sword of the world no matter what. Countless dragon scales fell off. They floated in the sky above the wilderness like countless mirrors of light. They fell to the ground and reflected the light in the sky, turning the whole world into a river that could not calm down under the twilight. Every time a dragon scale fell, a ball of heavenly fire would ignite in the wilderness. Countless people screamed and rolled in the heavenly fire. Then, the clouds died and turned into green smoke. The sword of the world circled the dragon's neck. The giant golden dragon's head and body separated. The huge dragon head and the dragon body that had been winding in the sky suddenly froze and floated in the air. Then, like a golden river of sand, it fell to the world. The headmaster's third stroke, dragon slaying. The headmaster waved his sleeves and his black cloak rose with the wind. His left sleeve waved the giant golden dragon's body into the night in the north. The disintegrating golden sand danced wildly in the night and then exploded continuously. Every grain of golden sand contained the purest and most terrifying Haotian divine light. Now that it was completely burned, it produced an unknown amount of light and heat. The night in the north was suddenly purified. His right sleeve compressed the giant golden dragon's head into a ball of pure light. He pressed his palm into the top of Sung Sung's head. The remaining cold aura in Sung Sung's body suddenly disappeared like ice and snow meeting the sun. Deep in the South Sea, the seawater in front of the Black Reef kept rolling because of the burning magma. It spewed white steam into the sky. It looked very uneasy, just like the Taoist in indigo. He looked at the north of this flat world, at the incessant flashes of lightning and the incessant rumbling of thunder. After a long period of silence, he sighed and shook his head. Deep in the west wilderness, the chanting in the clouds was slightly chaotic because of the strange phenomenon. The yellow temples that were used to being quiet did not seem to know what to express. It was just like the chief preaching monk's mood at the moment. He looked at the lightning above the eastern wilderness. His tired face looked even more tired. He kept wiping the sweat on his forehead. The lightning gradually stopped, but the sweat on his forehead increased. The green mountain behind the Jishou Abbey was silent. It was full of silence and despair. An old and shrill voice cried, "We still can't kill him. What can we do?" The divine guard of light and the giant golden dragon scales fell from the sky and turned into Haotian divine fire. It engulfed the humans on the ground of the wilderness and burned many people to death in a very short time. Before a battle of this level, all the powers in the world could only watch from the sidelines. But today, no one was qualified to watch. They could only be affected and die regardless of who they were. Whether it was the desolate or the people from the Central Plains, the Westhill Divine Palace or the Devil's Doctrine, as long as they were touched by the heavenly fire, they would instantly turn into charred corpses and be purified into smoke. The headmaster landed on the ground of the wilderness. He waved his hand and clouds gathered. His sleeves moved and the wind blew. He looked and it rained. In an instant, the rain fell on the wilderness, extinguishing the heavenly fire and collecting the smoke. The rain and wind stopped. The sky that had been divided by light and darkness returned to normal, revealing a blue sky. White clouds floated in the blue sky and cloud-like flocks of sheep appeared in the distance. The sunset sands will open in reverse tomorrow? It's still not right. The headmaster looked at the blue sky and white clouds and shook his head. He casually threw the sword in his hand to the south. Then he put his hands behind his back and led Ning Kai and Sang Sang to the black horse carriage. The dazzling light disappeared, and so did the cold night. Hundreds of thousands of people in the wilderness gradually woke up. They saw the tall figure and the black horse carriage that was gradually getting farther away. They vaguely guessed what had happened, but they dared not believe it. Because even the most secret scriptures and the most blasphemous dark history books had never recorded such a thing. The war between the divine kingdom and the human world ended with the human world winning. The ancient sword of the human world flew back to the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom. It fell from the cave in the mountain and quietly inserted into the bottom of the dry pond. After a while, the water in the pond appeared out of nowhere and drowned the sword. Lu Bai looked at the pond in front of him and knew that he could never use this sword again, even if he had forged it himself and refined it with his spirit for many years. One who had seen the sea could not be water. This sword had been used by the headmaster and fought against the will of Haotian. How would it be willing to be used by a layman and fight in the human world? There was no disappointment on Lu Bai's face, only calmness and respect. He tidied his clothes and washed his face with the pond water. Then he bowed to the northern wilderness. He was the most powerful man in the world, the proud sage of sword Lu Bai. He had never respected or feared anyone. He only bowed to the headmaster. The headmaster of the Tang Academy was a legendary name. Even though this name was gradually forgotten by the world and many cultivators, it was still the most powerful name in the human world in the eyes of the truly powerful cultivators. Many people were guessing how tall the headmaster was. The abbey dean of the Jishou Abbey and the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple had once been defeated by the headmaster. They once thought that they could roughly calculate how tall the headmaster was, but then they realized that they were wrong. Lu Bai guessed that the headmaster of the academy was in the legendary state of tranquility and inaction because he had not been involved in worldly affairs for many years. However, he was shocked to find that he was wrong. At the top of Helan City, Master Huang Yang looked at the blue sky and white clouds in the distance and said with emotion, "In the spring of the 13th year of the Tianqi era, the academy reopened." His Majesty presided over the opening ceremony in the academy while the nation master Nai played chess in the separation pavilion by the road. I once asked him how high the headmaster of the academy was. The emperor asked, "How did Qingshan answer?" The master of nation once said that the headmaster was as tall as a few floors. At that time, I said that the second floor was already very high, and the headmaster of the academy actually had several floors. That was really high. But now it seems that we were wrong. How high is the headmaster? Master Huang Yang sincerely praised, so the headmaster is as high as the sky. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 679. First of all, I didn't update yesterday. Although I would make up for it on the weekend, I didn't manage to complete the promised 4 chapters. So, I had nothing to say. I apologized and worked hard. The reason I want to explain is because some of my friends think that since I asked for leave at 4 p.m. yesterday, and there is still a long time before I go to sleep, if I work hard and work hard enough, I should be able to write something. I want to explain this to them. Indeed, I write novels to earn money. I write business novels. In a sense, I've said in various interviews that inspiration isn't the most important thing when writing a business novel. The most important thing is technique. But after all, writing novels is also a kind of creative work, and it has its own peculiarities. Many times, I need to be in a good state of mind to continue writing, especially when I'm writing some important chapters. For example, I took a leave at 4 p.m. yesterday and slept at 11 p.m. yesterday. There was still a long time before I could write. If I worked hard, I should be able to write something. The problem is, I know I can't be in a good state yesterday. So, if I force myself to write something, there will be problems. If it's a normal plot, then it's fine. I'll close my eyes. Good for you, good for me, good for everyone. But for this plot, I have some requirements. I need to write until I'm satisfied. Yesterday's leave had nothing to do with any plot discussion. Although I am easily affected in this aspect, I am more willing to write according to the established plot and prove that I wrote well. I have always been a very consistent person in this aspect. The reason I took a leave was that I was not in a good state and was very tired. To put it simply, if I wrote this plot yesterday, it would definitely be much worse than the 5 chapters one wrote today. I couldn't accept this, so I confirmed that I couldn't write it yesterday. I thought it would be more appropriate to let everyone know in advance, so I took a leave early. Wang Xiaobo said somewhere at the beginning of Red Horsedale Run at Night. Every book should be interesting. For some books, being interesting is the reason for its existence. For others, being interesting is the standard it should meet. The so-called interesting, in my understanding, is what the master said. When I was writing Ing Xiao and the Chronicles of Suzaku, I always put these words in the synopsis. Although I rarely mentioned it in recent years, the truth is that I've always treated this as my goal in writing books. Because it's rare for me to have a career that I like, I don't want to waste it. I want to do interesting things and live an interesting life. That is my explanation. If you do not understand, I understand and apologize. If you do understand, I thank you most sincerely. The reason why I'm explaining this is because I don't want you to think that I'm disappointing when you're working so hard to support me. I want to explain that I'm not lazy or not working hard. At least for this month, I want to write more than anyone else, and I will work hard to write more. Tomorrow's update might be a little late. Thank you for your continued support and understanding. Please continue to support me. I will continue to write as hard as I did today and strive to write a good plot. Finally, please cast your monthly vote. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 680. The Emperor smiled and then turned to walk down the gate tower. The commander of the Yulin Royal Guards and the head of the bodyguards quickly followed. Another servant handed him armor and sword. It seemed that they were going to war. Master Huang Yang was stunned. He followed the emperor around the stone path at the top of the city and walked down the city. He asked, "Your Majesty, where are you going?" The emperor put on the heavy armor with the help of his servant. He said without looking back, "There will be turmoil in the eastern wilderness soon. I'm going to lead the army to suppress it." Master Huang Yang had studied Buddhism for many years, but he was not proficient in secular affairs and strategies. He was still confused. He thought that a war had just ended in the wilderness. Was there going to be another war soon? A Yulin Royal Guards brought a yellow horse and handed the reins to Master Huang Yang. The emperor sat on the horse and looked at him. He said, "If you are worried about my safety, then come with me." Master Huang Yang took the reins, still wondering what the emperor was going to do. The emperor put his right hand on his face and confirmed that the armor was fine. He said, "From this moment on, the Tang Empire will face the threat of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. So I'm going to attack first." Master Huang Yang was shocked and said, "Your Majesty, do you want to declare war on Haotian?" The Tang Empire had been established for 1,000 years and had fought with countless countries in the world. But even during the years of continuous war, it had never had a direct conflict with the West Hill Divine Palace. Both sides knew clearly where the line was. The West Hill Divine Palace did not want to face the most powerful country in the world, and the Tang Empire did not want to be the enemy of the whole world. After all, most of the Tang people were also believers of Haotian. The emperor said calmly, "The headmaster has declared war on Haotian." At this time, General Han Qin rushed out of the gate tower and grabbed the reins of the emperor's horse tightly. He said in a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, let me go. There is a movement in the Golden Palace. Please stay in Helan City." The emperor said, "Although Chanyu of the Golden Tribe is ambitious, he does not have the guts to face me. The so-called unusual movements are all in the future. Within 10 days, his elite cavalry will not be able to reach Helan City. By then, my army will have already returned." The wilderness was deathly silent. For a long time after the black carriage disappeared, no one dared to speak. The only thing that could be heard was the heavy breathing of hundreds of thousands of people and the low neighing of warhorses. The light and the night, the golden dragon and the divine general, were finally ended by the sword of the human world. They turned into a sky full of stars and fell on the wilderness. Then, the wind rose, the rain fell, the smoke and dust dispersed, and the blue sky reappeared. These scenes had completely surpassed the wildest imagination of mankind. This story had completely surpassed all human experience. Shock, awe, and fear lingered in the hearts of hundreds of thousands of people for a long time. The more powerful a person was, the easier it was for him to wake up. On the giant chariot in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army camp, the tall figure behind the heavy curtains slowly stood up. He no longer looked at the desolate man's tribe in the north, but at the Tang army in the west. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace held the divine scepter in his hand and looked at the Tang cavalrymen who were as shocked as the allied forces but looked proud. He remained silent. The sword split the sky, then killed the divine general, and then slaughtered the golden dragon. Today, the headmaster had shown the peak of the human world, an almost miraculous ability. He was the dean of the academy and the spiritual pillar of the Tang Empire, so of course the Tangs would be proud. But in the eyes of the West Hill Divine Palace and the millions of Haotian believers in the world, the headmaster's action was a great disrespect to the will of Haotian. It was an unforgivable blasphemy. The light was about to defeat the darkness, but the headmaster stood in front of the light and saved the daughter of Yama. The sacrifices made by all the countries in the human world were in vain. The Tang Empire was proud because of the headmaster, so it had to bear the price of this pride. The hierarch lord's low and solemn voice echoed in the wilderness. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army gradually came to their senses. The way they looked at the Tang army in the west gradually became complicated. There was vigilance, disgust, anger, and finally hatred. Smoke and dust rose. Shrill whistling and clattering of hooves were heard. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army slowly changed their battle formation and began to attack the Tang army in the west. Half of the Northeast Border Cavalry and 1/3 of the Northern Expeditionary Army were on this wilderness. The number of soldiers was the largest the Tang Empire had mobilized in recent years. Coupled with the Tang cavalry's widely recognized combat power, the Tang army alone was enough to wipe out a small country like the Song dynasty and the Qi dynasty. But this war in the wilderness was launched by the West Hill Divine Palace. The countries in the Central Plains had sent their most powerful troops, the most powerful cultivators and warriors. The number was almost 4 times that of the Tang army, so there was a possibility of victory. The smoke and dust gradually settled. The wilderness under the blue sky and white clouds was covered by the cavalry. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was divided into 2 different camps. The atmosphere became extremely tense. The original opponent of the Divine Palace Coalition Army, the Desolate Man tribe, had become insignificant. A shrill whistle sounded, and the war began without warning. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, which had an absolute advantage in numbers, finally defeated the right front of the northeast border military of the Tang Empire after paying the price of more than 30,000 lives. They besieged the Tang cavalry in the wilderness. But whether it was the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace or the royal generals of the Yan, Jin, Song, and Qi dynasty, they all knew very well that the Divine Palace Coalition Army would have to pay a heavy price if they wanted to defeat the Tang army. But they still had to do it. Because the Tang Empire had turned its back on Haotian. Because the headmaster made all of them feel fear. In order to erase this fear, they had to stand firmly on the side of Haotian and seize the opportunity in front of them. At this moment, the sound of hooves thundered. Countless cavalry came from the east. They were dressed in black armor and had a murderous aura. They rushed into the wilderness like a black torrent. In the blink of an eye, they broke the formation of the Divine Palace Coalition Army. The world-famous black-armored cavalry of the Tang Empire had arrived. The flag of the Tang Empire fluttered, and under it was the emperor himself. The black horse carriage galloped on the wilderness. It was late spring, but the wilderness was not desolate. The ground was covered with lush green grass. As far as the eye could see, the green spread to the horizon, like a green carpet dotted with small white flowers. The small white flowers were flocks of sheep, and there were real small white flowers looming in the grass. The spring wind blew. The big black horse kept shaking its head and ran excitedly. Its hooves trampled on the grass, kicking up black mud and flower petals. Some petals floated to its big nostrils. It was so beautiful that it wanted to neigh loudly. Thinking of the sublime being in the carriage behind it, it did not dare to neigh loudly. It suppressed the excitement of escaping death and panted heavily. It looked like it was giggling. Ning Ke picked up a cup of tea and handed it to the headmaster. He said, "Teacher, have some tea." At this moment, he was in a very good mood. If he fully revealed the smile in his heart, there would be many more dimples on his face. He felt that it would be disrespectful to the headmaster, so he forced himself to suppress it. He suppressed it to the point that his lips were trembling, which made his smile look silly. Sang Sang sat by the window, nervously holding the corner of her sleeves. She looked at the headmaster, who had unceremoniously occupied the soft couch from the moment he got on the carriage. Her smile was a little silly and also very silly. The headmaster took the cup of hot tea and took a sip. He looked at the two and said, "Why are you giggling?" Ning Ke giggled and said honestly, "Other than giggling, I really don't know what to do at this moment." Sang Sang nodded and giggled foolishly. The headmaster turned the head of the giant golden dragon into a ball of light and poured it into her body. The cold aura in her body suddenly disappeared, leaving only a few traces. It was no longer a threat. What was more amazing was that she could clearly feel that there was a very fresh aura of life in her body. The aura was not as pure as Haotian's divine light and Yama's imprint. It seemed a little complicated. The aura of life was all-encompassing. There were flowers, fish, and birds, wind, frost, rain, dew, snow lotus in the willow lake, the steam in the bun shop, and the oil under the hot and sour noodle soup stall. The aura of life contained everything in the human world. Naturally, there were many impurities, even filthy things. However, it seemed that it was because of these impurities that it seemed so fresh. Because it was real. Sang Sang did not understand what the headmaster had done to her, but she vaguely understood that the key was not the ball of divine light that was poured into her body. It was this fresh aura of life that could cure her. The illness that no one could cure was cured by the headmaster with a single move. They had fled for thousands of miles, gone through hardships, and finally saw the divine punishment of Haotian in despair. But the headmaster had cured her with a single move. In the past 2 years, on this day, Ning Ke and Sang Sang's emotions were on a roller coaster. They had received too many shocks. At this time, as he said, they really did not know what to do other than giggling. After a while, he gradually calmed down and sobered up. Thinking about what had happened before, he frowned slightly and said worriedly, "Teacher, the West Hill Divine Palace will not let it go so easily." The headmaster handed the teacup to him and said, "What does that have to do with me? Have another cup of tea." Ning Ke smiled bitterly and poured the hot tea into the cup. He thought that for the headmaster, the anger of the West Hill Divine Palace was not as important as a cup of hot tea, but the Tang Empire would definitely be affected. "Teacher, aren't you worried that Haotian will vent his anger on Chang'an? Will Haotian be so bored? What about the West Hill Divine Palace? If His Majesty was not His Majesty, he would still be studying in the back of the mountain of the academy. According to the time, it should be your 6th brother. Since he is now in the wilderness, what do you think I need to worry about? But it is still very dangerous. Teacher, why don't you do something? Would I be so bored?" Hearing this extremely casual and irresponsible answer, Ning Ke opened his mouth wide and did not know what to say. If someone dared to compare him with Haotian in the past, he would definitely think that the person was crazy. However, after witnessing the divine battle today, he knew that the headmaster was not crazy. He thought for a while and said, "Heaven's way is heartless, but teacher, you are a person with feelings. The headmaster asked, "Is the wilderness full of people?" Ning Ke nodded. The headmaster pointed to himself and said, "I am also a person, right?" Ning Ke thought of the tall figure in the bright sky holding a sword and slaying a dragon. After a long hesitation, he said, "You should, maybe, still be a person." The headmaster was furious upon hearing this. His beard fluttered and he scolded, "What maybe? I am a person. If I am not a person, then what am I?" Ning Ke smiled bitterly and said, "You are right, but what does this have to do with our discussion?" The headmaster said, "Since I am a person, can I kill everyone in the world? This kind of thing is really meaningless. I don't want to waste time on it." Ning Ke asked seriously, "Then what do you think is interesting?" The headmaster said leisurely, "Fighting with heaven is endless joy, and only then can one think big. I've used up all my brain power. I'll write one chapter today, and then I'll go and change the introduction." The introduction of Jiang Ye's book should have been this sentence. It's just that in order to avoid spoilers in the past, I've used the current version. Also, I'm rather infuriated when I saw some rather negative comments. Yeah, I admit my mistake. In the future, I won't do such things that affect my writing. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 681. Ning Ke said, "Actually, fighting with others is also a very interesting thing." The headmaster glanced at him and said, "What a loser." Ning Ke laughed and thought that he was not qualified to fight with heaven like the headmaster. He had been fighting with others all these years and had long gotten used to the joy and anger in it. The spring breeze entered the carriage. It was calm and joyful. They had finally escaped death and separation. The people in the carriage relaxed and then started to complain. It was the students complaining to the headmaster. "Why didn't you do anything all these years? Was it because it was too boring? If you had taken action, eldest senior brother wouldn't have been so tired, and there would have been fewer casualties." The headmaster sniffed the tea and looked at Sang Sang. He said, "I don't care how many people will die. I just don't know what is the right choice and what is good for the world." Ning Ke said, "Since you don't care how many people die, why do you care about what is good for the world?" The headmaster said, "If a tail of silver falls on the ground in front of you, will you pick it up?" Ning Ke and Sang Sang looked at each other and saw each other's determination. Ning Ke said, "Of course I will." The headmaster was drinking tea and almost spat it out when he heard this. This was a well-designed course, but it could not be successfully carried out by Ning Quebec. He could not help but feel annoyed and said, "I won't pick it up." Ning Ke saw that the headmaster was in a bad mood and did not dare to say more. He said, "You can pick it up if you want." The headmaster said again, "But if a banknote of 10,000 taels of silver falls on the ground, I will definitely pick it up." Ning Ke understood what the headmaster meant. He thought that the headmaster's clear calculation of life and interests was indeed a little cold. He sighed and said, "I know that I am cold-blooded, but I did not expect that you are the same kind of person." The headmaster said, "It's not cold, it's just indifferent. When you see something many times, it will naturally become indifferent. I have lived for so many years and my friends and relatives have gradually separated. I have long seen death as indifferent. It is just the end of nature. There is no difference between dying earlier or later." Ning Ke asked, "Then why did you choose to fight against Haotian after hesitating for so long and even after so many years?" The headmaster leaned on the couch and looked at the blue sky and white clouds through the skylight. He said, "Because, in the end, I still found that I do not like and even hate Haotian." Ning Ke thought that you were probably the only one in the world who was qualified to make such an emotional comment on Haotian. The headmaster looked back at Ning Ke and said, "Of course, you are my student. You are too involved in this matter. That is why I have to intervene." Ning Ke was moved by her words, but he did not want to show it out of habit, so he forced himself to bear it. How could the headmaster not see through his feelings? He said discontentedly, "It's rare for me to be so brave. Can't you be moved to tears? Why do you have to put up with it?" Ning Ke looked at him and said sincerely, "Teacher is mighty." Thinking of the headmaster's words about rare bravery, he was slightly startled and asked, "Didn't you say that fighting against the heavens is an endless joy? Rare bravery? Could it be that today is your first time fighting? If you're talking about fighting, then you're right. Today is my first time fighting Hao Tian." The headmaster put down the teacup and said, "There are many ways to fight. Fighting is not the only way to fight. I have fought with Hao Tian for more than 1,000 years and used all kinds of methods. Only an idiot like your youngest uncle would always want to fight with Hao Tian. He did not think about what would happen if he lost." This sentence was dragged out a little, and it sounded a little desolate and regretful. Ning Ke filled the empty teacup with hot tea and took a handkerchief to wipe the tea from his beard. He said with a smile, "Didn't you win today?" The headmaster slapped away his hypocritical hand and was angry at his stupidity. He scolded, "What I won today was just a manifestation of Hao Tian's will, not Hao Tian himself. If this is considered a victory, how could your youngest uncle die back then? If he heard what you said, he would be so angry that he would come back to life again." Ning Ke said shamelessly, "My level is too low. I still need you to explain. The giant golden dragon and the divine guard of light on the golden chariot are all illusions created by Hao Tian's divine light. They look scary, but in fact, they are not powerful at all." After saying this, the headmaster dipped his finger into the teacup, dipped it in the hot tea, and flicked it into the air. The tea droplets floated in the air, reflecting the sunlight coming in through the skylight and condensing into a tiny golden dragon. Ning Ke looked at this scene and felt the pressure of light from the golden dragon in front of him. He was shocked, speechless, and thought to himself, "How much shock is the headmaster trying to give me?" Then he confirmed that the headmaster was right. The giant golden dragon and the divine guard of light that appeared in the sky of the wilderness today were enough to kill most cultivators in the world. However, if it was the eldest brother who ran the fastest or the chief preaching monk who was invincible, they might really be able to defeat them. At least they would not lose too quickly. The horse carriage galloped on the wilderness. The grass was broken and the wild flowers scattered. The warm spring breeze came in through the window. Sang Sang coughed softly. Ning Ke asked worriedly, "Headmaster, what should we do next? Is Sang Sang's illness okay?" The headmaster flicked his finger again, and the vivid golden dragon of light in the carriage disappeared instantly. It turned into tea droplets and fell on the floor, like morning dew. Light is existence, and darkness is nothingness. Turning existence into nothingness is like being blind. So we can't count on Hao Tian's divine light to suppress the imprint of Yama in her body. The Buddhism Dharma emphasizes self-enlightenment. It's still a self-deceiving method that can't be completely eliminated. The headmaster looked at Sang Sang and said, "I've thought about it and finally decided to use the power of the human world to leave the imprint of Yama in your body in the human world. You can blend with the light so that Yama can't detect it. The human world is the hottest, most chaotic, and most real. It can make the pure no longer pure, turn cold into warmth, and turn heat into smoke. It's a process of creating something out of nothing." Ning Ke thought for a long time and realized that it was impossible for him to understand these words with his wisdom and state. He sincerely asked, "Headmaster, what is the power of the human world? What should we do? What should we do? I've already done it." The headmaster was a little surprised and said, "I chopped off the dragon's head and used Hao Tian's divine light to suppress the imprint of Yama in Sang Sang's body. I also poured the power of the human world into her body. What else do you want me to do?" Ning Ke widened his eyes and asked, "What is the power of the human world?" "I am the human world, and my power is the power of the human world." The headmaster looked at Sang Sang and laughed happily. Ning Ke also laughed, but it was a little silly. Looking at the two of them laughing heartily, Sang Sang also laughed, but her smile seemed a little strange. Her smile was silly and cute. But the smile in her eyes was very indifferent. She was obviously one person, but she had two kinds of smiles. She was sitting by the window, but she seemed to be sitting in the sky, overlooking the earth. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 682. The smile in Song Song's eyes was very indifferent. In the dictionary, there were many explanations for indifference, such as the appearance of indifference, coldness, or ignorance. These explanations were very suitable for her, who often revealed her natural dullness, especially ignorance. At this moment, she sat by the window and looked at the headmaster and Ning Quebec. It was just like the giant golden dragon peeking out from behind the burning clouds in the sky of the wilderness, and the divine warrior of light standing in the chariot overlooking the earth. However, her position seemed to be higher, so the indifference in her eyes fell on another field. There was another explanation for indifference. It was to suppress happiness and reject life. It was to stay away from beauty, in other words, with the aura of the human world. It represented holiness and solemnity beyond the secular world. An indifferent smile appeared at the bottom of Song Song's eyes and disappeared in an instant. She did not feel anything, so Ning Ke naturally did not see it. But the headmaster of the academy did. The headmaster looked at Sang Sang and was silent for a long time. When Ning Ke felt that it was a little strange and Song Song's eyes showed confusion and helplessness, he smiled and looked away. The headmaster's eyes fell on Song Song's hand. Song Song's left hand clenched into a fist. From the Lang Temple, to escaping from Yueluan Kingdom's Chaoyang City, to being taken in by the desolate man's tribe, she had always held it in her left hand. The headmaster's eyes fell on Song Song's left hand, revealing something in her palm. It was a white chess piece. The headmaster's expression was as calm as an old pine that had experienced countless autumns and winters. His eyes, however, were not calm. Billions of stars appeared in his black pupils and then began to move irregularly, drawing countless dense lines and finally condensing into a bright spot. This happened in an instant. No one could see what happened in the headmaster's eyes. Ning Ke could not see it, Sang Sang could not see it, even if everyone in the world stood in front of the headmaster. The bright spot in the depths of the headmaster's eyes suddenly exploded. The headmaster closed his eyes and then opened them again. His eyes returned to normal, his black robe did not move, his expression was still calm, and his wrinkles still seemed to contain infinite wisdom. As if nothing had happened. As if everything had already happened. The wall of the black carriage was engraved with extremely complicated talisman arrays, which originated from the scriptures of the South Gate Temple of Haotian and were created by Master Yen Sei at the cost of half of his life. They were extremely exquisite and difficult to break. The moment the headmaster opened his eyes again, the talisman array on the wall of the carriage suddenly seemed to be injected with an endless amount of extra aura. The calm talisman intense suddenly became chaotic, and the talisman lines shone with golden light and then dimmed. The carriage was made of stainless steel and was extremely heavy. At this time, the talisman array suddenly failed and the wheels immediately sank deep into the soft ground of the spring wilderness. The leather rope deeply cut into the muscles of the big black horse. The big black horse was not prepared at all. It did not expect that the carriage behind it would suddenly become so heavy. Its front hooves rose into the air, and then it suddenly knelt down and fell heavily to the ground. The big black horse neighed in pain, and the grass beneath it was crushed into a ball. The wildflowers in the grass scattered and floated up in the dust, gradually disappearing into the clouds. The wilderness was clear for thousands of miles, with only a few clouds floating leisurely. In the blue sky above the black carriage, there was a cloud made of rain. When the wildflowers floated up, there would be rain falling, like a thin water column, falling on the carriage. The pitter-patter sounded like crying. Looking from the ground of the wilderness, the sun just moved behind the rain cloud. The clear sunlight penetrated the 3 cracks in the cloud, and it was slightly bright. 2 of the 3 cracks were on the top, and one was on the bottom. They were like a person's eyes and lips, squinting like a cute smile on an innocent face. The headmaster was very annoyed. He waved his hand and the clouds and rain disappeared. He said, crying and laughing at the same time, "Are you sick?" Ning Ke did not know what had happened at all. He said, "Teacher, Sang Sang is sick." The headmaster looked at him and shouted, "Do you have medicine?" Ning Ke did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "Don't you have medicine?" The headmaster became more and more displeased. He said, "She has already taken the medicine. Why do you mention it?" Ning Ke was speechless. He thought that all the disciples in the back of the mountain of the academy knew that the headmaster was not an otherworldly sublime person. He had a temper, but it was too sudden and unnecessary today. "Teacher, what on earth happened?" he asked worriedly. The headmaster was silent for a moment. He suddenly said, "I'm a little hungry. What do you want to eat?" Ning Ke looked at the slightly damp wilderness outside the carriage window. He thought that in such a desolate place, what else could they eat other than dry food? The headmaster glanced at Sang Sang and said, "Since you are still alive, you should live well. You should have some requirements for the quality of life. How can you eat so casually? I'll take you to eat something delicious." The big black horse got rid of the dizziness caused by the collision. After confirming that the carriage had become light again, it followed the headmaster's instructions and galloped toward the north of the wilderness. Along the way, they could only hear the wind whistling and see the grass shining. It didn't take long for the black horse carriage to arrive at a meadow. There were dozens of sheep scattered around the meadow. There were a few tents at the side and back. It seemed to be a herdsman's tribe, but it was too small. Ning Ke got off the horse carriage and looked at the angle of the sun. There were still snow hills in the distance. He looked at the length of the grass and confirmed that they were at the extreme north of the wilderness. He couldn't understand how the horse carriage could travel so far in such a short time. Several dark-skinned herdsmen walked out of the tents. They looked alert and panicked. It seemed that these herdsmen rarely met outsiders. Ning Ke didn't know what the headmaster brought them here to eat. As the saying goes, a disciple should do his best. He walked toward the herdsman and wanted to see if there was any food in the tents so that he could buy it. He knew the barbarian language of the wilderness and was even good at some remote tribal dialects. However, he suddenly realized that he couldn't communicate with the herdsman in the wilderness. "Don't show off your little tricks." The headmaster walked down from the horse carriage and reprimanded him. The herdsmen reacted strangely when they saw the headmaster. They were touched, excited, and more in awe. Two of them knelt in front of the headmaster and kissed his feet. The other herdsmen ran to their own tents and brought their wives, children, and elders out. Then they bowed to the headmaster. Ning Ke realized that these herdsmen had seen the headmaster before. He couldn't help but wonder which palace these herdsmen belonged to and why they couldn't understand him. He was even more curious about how the headmaster would communicate with these herdsmen. He never thought that the headmaster couldn't communicate with these herdsmen. Because now he was even more certain that the headmaster was omnipotent. The headmaster began to communicate with these herdsmen. He pointed to the sheep on the meadow in the distance and spread out his hands to measure the size of the sheep. Then he moved his fingers up to the sky to simulate the appearance of a flame. He kept mumbling. "The sheep can't be too big. It's only this big. If you want to roast it, use the roasting method you're best at." Ning Ke was speechless again. He didn't expect the headmaster to communicate in this way. The headmaster knew what he was thinking and said, "I've always said that there is no omnipotent person in the world. Even I can't understand all the languages in the world. But so what? Language is a small trick. As long as you know how to gesture, you won't starve to death and you can find delicious food anywhere." Ning Ke knew that trying to reason with his teacher was an extremely masochistic idea. Therefore, he firmly gave up and asked his own doubts, "Which palace does this small tribe belong to?" The headmaster said, "It doesn't belong to any palace. These herdsmen have been nomadic in this bitter and cold land for thousands of years. They don't communicate with the outside world. Although their lives are hard, it's peaceful. Ning Ke said, there are only so many people. It's hard for them to reproduce. The headmaster said, the butcher hid here for a period of time. He must have taught these herdsmen some secret method. Ning Ke heard about the butcher and the drunkard from the headmaster and was slightly surprised. The headmaster said again, the butcher's roasted leg of lamb is the best. I don't know where he is now and he refused to see me for many years. So the best leg of lamb in the world is here. Ning Ke laughed and said, the secret method you mentioned, is it to carry on the family line or roast the leg of lamb? The headmaster laughed and slapped his thigh. He said, both. Sang Sang gave 2 bowls of milk wine to the headmaster and Ning Quebec. The headmaster took a sip and praised it. Then he said to her, you should try it too. It tastes good. At this moment, the leg of lamb was finally roasted. The herdsman respectfully brought it over and left. Ning Ke didn't know how to describe the best roasted leg of lamb in the world. He smelled the aroma of the leg of lamb and looked at the oil on the leg. He was tempted. But at this moment, he would never make a mistake. Following the instructions of Chin Pippi and eldest brother, he used a sharp knife to cut 2 pieces of the best part of the leg of lamb and brought it to the headmaster's mouth. The headmaster chewed the lamb and closed his eyes. He held the bowl of milk wine and looked very intoxicated. He was waiting for the next moment to use the milk wine to turn the aroma of the lamb into a charming drunkenness. Something is wrong. The headmaster suddenly opened his eyes. Then he smacked his lips like an old farmer who had just finished eating noodles. He carefully tasted the taste in his mouth and his expression suddenly changed. He said, this lamb is wrong. Ning Ke was stunned. He cut another piece of the roasted leg of lamb and put it into his mouth. The meat was so delicious that he almost chewed off his tongue. He wondered what was wrong. He asked, teacher, what's wrong? The headmaster said angrily, this lamb doesn't taste like lamb. How can it be called lamb? Ning Ke didn't understand. How did it not taste like lamb? The headmaster suddenly fell silent. He looked at the roasted leg of lamb and sighed. Then he looked at Sang Sang and shook his head with a sigh. Sang Sang didn't understand what was going on. She whispered, do you want a bowl of lamb soup? The headmaster said angrily, I can't even eat the meat. How can I drink soup? Goo, 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 goo. There is still one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 683. Mutton did not taste like mutton, but it was still meat after all. It was a happy thing to have meat to eat. Therefore, the headmaster could only continue to eat meat after he was vexed and angry. However, he kept sighing as he ate. He looked at the mutton in his hand and sighed at Sang Sang and the sky. Sang Sang didn't understand what was going on. Ning Ke didn't understand either. He patted her on the shoulder, indicating that it was okay. He moved to the headmaster's side and asked in a low voice, teacher, is this a troublesome matter? He was referring to the matter of the headmaster saving Sang Sang and fighting with Haotian. The headmaster said sadly, of course it is troublesome. Ning Ke was slightly afraid and asked in a trembling voice, will Sang Sang be all right? The headmaster was furious and scolded, you only care about your wife and not about me, your teacher. Do you know what filial piety means? She has taken the medicine, what else can happen to her? Are you afraid that she will die? Even if I die, she may not die. What I care about now is meat. I don't like meat anymore. Ning Ke lifted his sleeves and wiped the spittle and grease off his face. He thought that the headmaster's temper was getting worse. Could it be that he was tired from the fight with the divine general of light? Thinking of this, he was no longer dissatisfied. He and Sang Sang quickly served the headmaster of the academy meat and wine. While serving the soup, Sang Sang comforted him softly. It is said that when people get old, their tempers become like that of a child. We just need to coax them. Ning Ke looked back at the headmaster who was cursing and drinking on the meadow. He said worriedly, I can bear with the headmaster's temper, but I feel that something is wrong. The roasted leg of mutton was not finished. Although Ning Ke and Sang Sang thought it was the best leg of mutton they had ever eaten in their lives, their appetite was limited, and the headmaster did not like it. The headmaster was the one who ate the most in the academy. Ning Ke and Sang Sang, who had been a cook in the academy for a long time, knew this very well. Ning Ke even felt that the ranking of the academy's strength had nothing to do with the time of joining the academy. It all depended on who ate the most. For example, the eldest brother looked gentle and calm, but if he really ate without restraint, the second brother would not be as good as him. Sang Sang asked the headmaster, Headmaster, what should we do with the rest of the mutton? Send them back to their tents? They eat these roasted lamb legs every day and are already sick of it. How would they be willing to eat the leftovers? It would be a waste to give it to them. The headmaster motioned for her to put down the remaining roasted leg of lamb. Then he whistled toward the snow-capped hills in the north. The whistle was not loud, but it traveled far. The sheep that were grazing in the meadow raised their heads one after another. Not long after, the ground of the wilderness trembled slightly. The sheep in the meadow seemed to have sensed great fear and fled in all directions towards the south. Some of the sheep even fainted and pretended to be dead. The big black horse was chewing on a lamb leg at the bottom of the meadow. Suddenly, it raised its head and stared vigilantly at the north. The hair on its neck danced in the wind as if it was about to stand up. A huge snowfield giant wolf and a relatively skinny male wolf slowly walked over from the snowy hill in the north of the meadow. They didn't even look at the fainted sheep in the meadow and kept moving forward. The big black horse showed its white teeth and roared fiercely at the two wolves in the distance. It knew very well how terrifying the snowfield giant wolf was and how much more terrifying the seemingly skinny male wolf was. But since the headmaster was beside it, it thought that it was invincible. When the female snowfield giant wolf sat down, there seemed to be a small snow mountain on the meadow. Sang Sang looked at it curiously and reached out to touch it. She found that the skin of the snowfield giant wolf was very soft. The snowfield giant wolf didn't have any reaction and let Sang Sang touch it calmly. It looked extremely docile. When it smelled a very faint scent from Sang Sang, it seemed to miss and comfort her in its eyes. The thin and weak male wolf sat in front of the headmaster with its two front paws in front of its chest, like a disciple bowing. Ning Ke stood behind the headmaster and looked at the scene. He found it very interesting. The headmaster motioned for Ning Ke to pass the remaining roasted lamb leg to it. After receiving the lamb leg, the skinny male wolf didn't eat it immediately. Instead, it bowed respectfully to the headmaster and then looked at his wife with a dignified look. The snow-white snowfield giant wolf left Sang Sang reluctantly and came to the headmaster to bow. The headmaster looked at the messy fur of the male wolf and knew that the wolves had a hard time in the wilderness after they went south these years. He reached out and gently stroked its head. The skinny male wolf didn't move and let the headmaster stroke it. Its body trembled slightly and it seemed to be very excited and happy. The headmaster looked at it and said, I don't know if I can see you in the future, so I asked you to come here. At this time, Sang Sang walked over and listened to the headmaster's words. Somehow, she felt a little sad. The headmaster looked at her and said, They are the parents of Tang Tang's little white wolf. Sang Sang then knew why the female snowfield giant wolf showed such an expression. She must have missed her child in the back mountain of the academy. The sadness in her heart grew stronger. After the snowfield giant wolf couple left, the black horse carriage also left the herdsman's tribe. The horse hooves with the fragrance of mutton fell and rose on the grassland, leaving footprints that attracted many ants. In the carriage, Sang Sang was massaging the headmaster's back. She seemed to have fully recovered and was good at serving people. The headmaster also liked being served by her. His eyes gradually closed and he seemed to be falling asleep. Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang and smiled, silently thanking her for her hard work. Sang Sang smiled and shook her head, indicating that she was not tired at all and that she was very willing to serve the headmaster. Although there were many barbarians living in the vast wilderness, compared to the Central Plains, it was still a sparsely populated place. They often ran for days without meeting a single person. The journey was very quiet and Ning Ke was about to fall asleep. Suddenly, there was a noise outside the window. There were peddlers, people shouting to open the road, waiter greeting guests, horse hooves and greetings. Why did the wilderness suddenly become so lively? Did the big black horse find a big tribe? Ning Ke was confused. He opened the curtains and looked outside. Then his body suddenly stiffened. Sang Sang came to the window and poked her head out. She was so shocked by what she saw that she almost screamed out loud. The black horse carriage was stopped on a busy long street. The streets were crowded with buildings, pedestrians weaved in and out, shops like a forest. Peddlers called out their wares one after another. Sedan bearers shouted as they carried their sedan chairs, and arrogant young men rode past on their horses. Ning Ke did not know where they were, but he was very sure that it could not be the wilderness. The headmaster woke up and looked at the young couple who were in a daze by the window. He asked, "Have we arrived?" Sang Sang nodded subconsciously. Then she suddenly felt that something was wrong. She looked back at the headmaster and said, "We have arrived, but we don't know where." The headmaster looked out of the window and said, "Yes, this is the capital of the Kingdom of Song." Ning Ke and Sang Sang were both shocked. They could not understand how they had arrived at the capital of the Kingdom of Song a moment ago when they were still eating roasted lamb in the extreme north of the wilderness. The Kingdom of Song was on the shore of the East Sea, thousands of miles away from the north of the wilderness. The one who was the most shocked was the big black horse. It had been pulling the carriage all the way. Ning Ke and Sang Sang did not see the process, but it saw it clearly. There was grass in front of it, but when its hooves landed, it landed on the bluestone road. The sudden change of thousands of miles scared it so much that its hooves became weak. There were many things that normal people would never be able to do. But as long as the headmaster helped, nothing was impossible. For example, Sang Sang was seriously ill and Ning Ke was injured all over. But now they were all healed. There were many things that could not be understood, but as long as it was related to the headmaster, then it could be understood. Ning Ke and Sang Sang now had such a thought. Because the headmaster was not human. Ning Ke even thought that the headmaster was not human. The black horse carriage moved slowly on the bustling street of the capital of the Kingdom of Song. The Taoist temple was surrounded by a dense crowd, praying for the holy war in the wilderness. They did not know the outcome of the holy war, nor did they know that the most important person in the war had now come to the Kingdom of Song, to their side. When the dark night faded and the light gradually faded, the blue sky and white clouds reappeared. The people of the Kingdom of Song stood up from the ground. Their lives had returned to normal at an unimaginable speed. Not everyone was still concerned about what had happened in the wilderness of the north. Some people had already begun to care about their small businesses and their own careers. The black horse carriage stopped in front of an inconspicuous restaurant. The restaurant was already bustling with noise and the sound of drinking and fists could be heard incessantly. The headmaster led Ning Ke and Sang Sang into the restaurant. They passed by the diners and drunkards and came to the relatively quiet third floor. A moment ago, they were kneeling on the ground and shivering. Now they are drinking and eating. The business of the restaurant is so good, not only because of the fear, but also because everyone needs to eat. The headmaster looked at the diners downstairs and said, "For ordinary people, eating is always the most important thing, because eating is for living. And living is more important than the war in the wilderness, more important than law, more important than morality, more important than faith, more important than anything else. Living is the most important thing. It's the only purpose of living. Anything like emotions or knowledge is just an accessory to living. I have to understand this order. Ning Ke thought for a while and said, but there must be some meaning to living, or it will be meaningless. The headmaster said, of course there must be some pursuit. But you must first live, then you are qualified to find meaning. Absolute self-interest? Against all sacrifices? I am not talking about one person's life, but the life of many people. It seems very complicated. Teacher, what are you trying to teach me? I want to tell you that since living is the most important thing in the world, then eating is the most important thing in the world. Ning Ke touched his belly and thought that he had just eaten roast lamb leg. What else was he going to eat? Before he could figure it out, the headmaster had already picked up the menu and ordered 18 dishes. I suddenly want to change the introduction to, this is the story of an old foodie and many young foodies. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 684. The headmaster loved to eat and was good at it. As long as he was present, it was not up to others to order the dishes. As the saying goes, hot and cold meat and vegetables, the monarch, the minister, and the assistant, the combination was extremely refreshing. Just looking at the menu was enough to make people drool. Those dishes looked simple, but the ingredients were actually very exquisite and needed to be made on the spot. There was still some time before the dishes would be served, but the headmaster had already made the arrangements. A basin of iced mashed taro was placed on the table. Desserts are supposed to be sweet. What I despise the most are those gourmets who want their desserts to be light. If you want it to be light, you can just drink water. Why would you eat sweets? The headmaster scooped a bowl of iced sweet mashed yam for Sang Sang and motioned for her to eat more. Then he scooped a bowl for himself and looked at Ning Quebec. It's fun to fight with heaven, but why? Ning Ke, who was serving himself mashed taro, could not help but be startled when he heard this. He thought that just a moment ago they were talking about the knowledge of ordering dishes and the principles of eating and drinking, and the next moment they were talking about the grand topic of fighting with the heavens. It was really too sudden. The headmaster said, did the little monk Chishan tell you about these things in the Lang Temple? Ning Ke recalled the conversation he had with Master Chishan in front of the Buddha Hall in the autumn rain. In that conversation, Master Chishan mentioned the legends above the 5 states and the top few states in the human world, such as the immortality of the devil's doctrine, the nirvana of Buddhism, the ascension of Taoism, and the transcendence of the academy. At that time, Master Chishan had said that in tens of thousands of years, there would always be people who could reach the end of the long path of cultivation, or reach the other side, or become immortal. At that time, they would return to the embrace of Haotian. Ning Ke was most concerned about whether returning to the embrace of Haotian meant death or immortality. Master Chishan could not answer this question. In the past countless years, the Buddha and the Taoist predecessors who had reached that step could not answer this question either. This was the greatest temptation and the greatest fear of cultivation. At the end of the conversation, Ning Ke asked if there were any cultivators who could not ascend to heaven even if they reached that stage. Master Chishan's answer was that no one could escape the cycle of heaven. That day, the Buddhist temple was very desolate in the autumn rain, and the sky was very bleak. Ning Ke felt very cold because he once again discovered that heaven's way was indeed a very ruthless existence. Master Chishan had already passed away. Even if he had any thoughts now, he could not tell Ning Quebec. Ning Ke recalled the conversation and vaguely guessed what the headmaster wanted to say. His body stiffened. It was noisy downstairs of the restaurant, but the people upstairs were discussing the affairs of the mortal world. This strong contrast made him feel very strange and absurd, until he was at a loss. The headmaster said, "Why do we have to fight against heaven? First, we need to know what heaven is." Ning Ke recalled the conversation he had with his teacher under the starry night after reading the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane in the back of the mountain of the academy. At the end of the conversation, the headmaster of the academy pointed to the night sky and said 4 sentences. We don't know whether Haotian is alive or not. We don't know whether he has a specific form or not. We still don't know where Haotian is. However, whether he has consciousness or not, junior brother confirmed it with his death. If Heaven's way really exists, it will look down on the world. Those people who struggle to survive on the earth, and even those cultivators who seem to be able to summon wind and rain, are just like ants. If the heavenly axiom does exist, it won't show the slightest mercy or attention to ants at all. When some of the ants suddenly raise their heads to look at it and even begin to grow wings that are as thin as feathers and fly to the sky, trying to challenge it, how can its consciousness and will allow that to happen? If Heaven's way really exists, it will be invisible and even more ruthless. These 4 sentences were Ning Kei's initial understanding of Haotian, or the so-called Heaven's way. Now, he had been fleeing with Sang Sang for a long time. He had seen clouds and crows, half of it was light, and the other half was darkness. He had also seen the giant golden dragon stretching its head out and the divine Lord of Light coming to the world. Now, he had a deeper understanding of Heaven's way, but so did the fear in his heart. Ning Kei looked at the cloudless blue sky outside the window of the restaurant and remained silent. The headmaster held a spoon and slowly scooped the mashed taro into his mouth. He leaned against the railing and looked rather relaxed. Then, he pointed the spoon at the sky outside the window and said, "Haotian is not the sky." Ning Kei asked, "Then what is Haotian?" Heaven was a very special word. It appeared many times in the language of the human world, and it often represented extremely strong emotions, such as fear, awe, or anger. For example, heaven has eyes, heaven has tears, or if heaven has feelings, heaven will grow old. There were also titles such as God's evil heaven, God's God, and so on. Even the most commonly used exclamations were related to heaven, heaven. Heaven represented supremacy, omnipresence, irresistibility, benevolence and universal love, indifference and ruthlessness, and everything. Heaven's way is the rule. A straight line between 2 points is the shortest, a triangle is more stable than a quadrilateral, light travels the fastest, water always flows downwards, and burning requires air. These are the rules of the world and are Heaven's way. The headmaster ate the mashed taro and said casually. Then, he threw the spoon in his hand out of the window. A moment later, there was a cry of pain from the street. A pedestrian must have been hit in the head. Just like water, everything has to fall downwards. This is also a rule. There was a quarrel below the restaurant. It was probably the pedestrian who had been hit in the head by the spoon and wanted to enter the restaurant to find the culprit. The headmaster pretended that nothing had happened. He looked at Ning Kei and continued, "Water will gather in the lowest part of the sea and will not flow downwards. When the spoon falls on the ground, or on the pedestrian's head, it will not continue to fall. This does not mean that the rule has been broken. It is just that another rule has begun to take effect. If it is not affected by external forces and there are no other rules, what would the situation be like? The spoon will continue to fall downwards until it falls into the abyss. Perhaps it will appear on Yama's dining table. Of course, I am more and more certain now that there is no underworld, and naturally there is no Yama." The headmaster put the empty bowl on the table and pushed it to Sang Sang. Sang Sang took the bowl and continued to scoop the mashed taro. The headmaster pointed at the bowl in Sang Sang's hand and said, "If this table is big and smooth enough, if the bottom of the bowl is smooth enough, if there is no girl named Sang Sang in the world who will pick up this bowl, then what will happen? Just like the spoon that keeps falling, this bowl will keep sliding forward." Ning Kei scratched his head and said, "Isn't this inertia?" "Inertia? That's a good word, but I like to call it the natural tendency of things or rules." The headmaster said, "This is also what I think of as life." Life? Ning Kei did not understand at all. He repeated in confusion, "Inertia is life?" The headmaster said, "When people are alive, they can walk, jump, think, eat, blink, and defecate. When they die, they become rotting corpses and bones, and they can't do any of these things. Their shape, composition, and characteristics are completely changed. When we are alive, we must ensure that we can continue to walk, jump, think, eat, blink, and defecate. We must ensure that we look like humans, which is to ensure that our shape, composition, and characteristics can continue to exist. This kind of existence is life. Ning Ke was very confused and said, but animals can also walk, jump, eat, blink, and defecate. The headmaster said, but they can't think. Ning Ke said, the big yellow bull and youngest uncle's donkey can definitely think. The headmaster said, but their shape is not like humans. Ning Ke said, what if we can make them look like humans? The headmaster said, if you have this ability, then they are humans. Ning Ke shook his head and said, how does this make sense? The headmaster said, why doesn't it make sense? Ning Ke was stunned for a moment, and then he finally figured it out. A life that looked exactly like a human, could walk, jump, eat, blink, defecate, and think. Wouldn't that be a human? Everyone wants to live. They want to maintain their shape and internal existence. This is life. Looking at it more broadly, human society also wants to maintain its shape and internal existence. For example, words, paintings, and organizations. So this is also a kind of life. The headmaster said, stone also has life. It also wants to maintain its shape. Its means are hard. If you want to destroy its life, you have to overcome its hardness. Water also has life. It can be clear or muddy, vast or silent. If you want to change its shape and characteristics and destroy its life, you have to boil it and dry it. Life is the continuation of its own form. Since heaven's way is the rule itself, then if it also has life, its life is to ensure that these rules will always be effective and not be destroyed. Ning Ke did not know what to say at this time. Fortunately, the dishes were served. The three of them ate 18 dishes. It was a very sumptuous meal. The headmaster kept putting food into Sangsang's bowl and then kept introducing and persuading her, you have to try this dish. Poor child, you have not lived a good life with Ning Ke all these years. You have to know how many delicious and fun things there are in the world. You should follow me and enjoy these days. Ning Ke and Sangsang were a little full after eating the roasted lamb leg and tasting the dishes of the kingdom of Song. Fortunately, the headmaster was indeed a 1,000-year-old foodie. He finished all 18 dishes like a whirlwind. The headmaster drank a cup of double-sprouted vegetables to clear his stomach. He seemed to be enjoying it. Ning Ke burped. Thinking of what the headmaster had said, his mood was as heavy as his stomach. He rubbed his numb face and was ready to ask for clarification. The headmaster put down the teacup and said, Haotian has two sides. One is the objectivity of rules, and the other is that it needs to maintain the objectivity of rules. Thus, it will show life like a living creature. Ning Ke asked, so? The headmaster pointed at the messy table and said, people need to eat when they are alive, and it needs to eat when it is alive. Ning Ke looked at the dishes dripping with soup and suddenly felt very scared and disgusted. I really want to curse and break down. This is the only chapter for today, and I will try to write more tomorrow. In fact, this is completely self-inflicted. The painful part is that there are still some plots in this area. The happy part is that this plot will be finished soon, and then Jiang Ye's book will never touch this kind of thing again. There is another very important thing to report to everyone. It is said that many friends think that Jiang Ye's book will be finished soon. This is still a long way from the end. The story of Ning Ke as the male lead and Sangsang as the female lead has just begun. I am a little nervous. Does everyone want to end the book earlier? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 685. Haotian wanted to eat, but what to eat was a problem. But no matter what it ate, it did not need to pay. But humans had to pay for their food. The headmaster asked Ning Ke to pay the bill and took them downstairs. They strolled around the capital of the Kingdom of Song and saw a branch of the Chenjinji cosmetics store. They went in and bought some powder for Sang Sang. Ning Ke felt that the headmaster was too nice to Sang Sang. He did not seem like the headmaster he knew. But his mind was occupied by those problems and he did not have time to think about it. The black horse carriage left the capital of the Kingdom of Song and returned to the grassy wilderness. Ning Ke looked at the flock of sheep and grass in the wilderness. He thought for a while and said, "Teacher, can it be simpler?" The headmaster got off the horse carriage and looked at the endless meadow. He said, "Grass grows in the wilderness and absorbs the essence of the soil. That's why it can grow. That's what it eats." The headmaster pointed to the sheep not far away and said, "Sheep eat grass." He pointed to a dozen miles away and said, "Look, those wolves are eating sheep." Then what does Haotian eat? Ning Ke suddenly thought of Master Lotus's angry scolding at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and Master Qishan's lament in the autumn rain in the temple. He thought of the doubts of many elders and said with a trembling voice, "It eats humans? Sheep can't directly eat soil and sunlight, so they eat grass. Wolves can't directly eat grass, so they eat sheep. Humans are much more powerful in comparison. We basically eat everything, but generally speaking, the higher the level of diet, the higher the efficiency of energy utilization. In the end, the higher the level of life can only eat the life of the lower level." The headmaster shook his head and said, "According to my guess, Haotian's vitality comes from the qi of heaven and earth. But it cannot eat qi of heaven and earth directly, just like sheep cannot eat soil and sunlight directly, and wolves cannot eat grass directly. So it needs a transition, and that is humans." Ning Ke said, "That's what I said just now." The headmaster said, "Ordinary people do not know what the qi of heaven and earth is. How can they change it? They still need cultivators to cultivate and increase the qi of heaven and earth to be the nutrients that Haotian needs." Ning Ke said, "You mean the qi of heaven and earth is grass, and cultivators are the sheep that eat grass. They turn the nutrients in the grass into something that Haotian, the wolf, can absorb?" The headmaster said, "That's about it." Ning Ke said, "The classics of Haotian Taoism have always said that cultivation is a gift from Haotian to human beings. According to what you said, this gift is really a bit gloomy and scary." The headmaster said, "Of course, Haotian is much more picky about food than the wolves in the wilderness. After all, it is the top collection of rules in our world. Ordinary cultivators are tasteless sheep in its eyes. Those cultivators who have surpassed the 5 states begin to have their own world and create their own rules. They purify the qi of heaven and earth in nature into their unique essence. At this point, they become delicious in Haotian's eyes." Ning Ke looked at the headmaster and asked, "What about you?" "At my level, of course I'm a beautiful sheep." The headmaster said with a smile, "But it's like the relationship between a lion and a herd of bison. If the bison is too strong or the herd is too strong, the lion will also feel threatened." Ning Ke had been very calm. When he was discussing with the headmaster, he still had the leisure to look at the grass under his feet and the cloud-like flock of sheep. In fact, his mood was extremely shaken. One moment he was like a pot of boiling sheep soup, the next moment he was like a frozen lamb jelly. He was already on the verge of collapse. He kept telling himself that this was an academic discussion and not related to reality, so he persevered. Academic discussions would eventually fall into the real world. After a long silence, he asked the most important question of the discussion so far, "Teacher, do you have any evidence?" Without evidence, this was just an academic discussion. He could let his thoughts wander to the deepest, most incredible and most gloomy places without any psychological burden. If there was evidence, then this would be a cruel and sad story that he could not bear to listen to, let alone discuss. The headmaster was very clear about his mood at this time. He said with a smile, "This is not a sad story, nor is it gloomy or scary. For countless years, the number of cultivators who can surpass the 5 states is not as many as the number of sheep that humans eat in a day. If we really talk about gloomy and scary, humans are much more terrifying than Haotian." Ning Ke could not find comfort in this sentence because he was a human, not a sheep. So he opened his eyes wide and looked at the headmaster innocently and pitifully, still wanting to hear the answer. Of course there is no evidence for this, the headmaster said. Then he did not wait for Ning Ke to take a breath and continued, but your youngest uncle and I have directly proved that Haotian has consciousness. It is similar to humans and a life form that is superior to humans. So it must eat. It's hard for you to deny this inference. Ning Ke's expression was very ugly, like a pig being pushed in front of a bucket of boiling water during the new year. Cultivation is indeed a very difficult thing. But for such a large number of humans, it is actually not too difficult. There will always be people who can cultivate, and there will always be people who can surpass the 5 states of the human world. The headmaster looked at him and said, no matter how rare it is for cultivators to surpass the 5 states, it must be a very large number after tens of thousands of years. Then can you tell me, where have they gone? Ning Ke said, birth, old age, sickness and death are common things. Those people might have died of old age naturally. This is not surprising. The headmaster said with a smile, I have lived for more than 1,000 years. If I want to, I can continue to live. Birth, old age, sickness and death are indeed very unusual things for people above the 5 states. Ning Ke felt a little dry and bitter. After a moment, he said, Nirvana of the Buddhism sect and Taoism sect become immortals. These are all described in myths. Have those people gone to heaven to enjoy the happiness of immortals? The headmaster said with a smile, heaven? Where is heaven? Where is Haotian's divine kingdom? After returning to the origin of the world, do you still have yourself? If you don't even have yourself, can you still be alive? Ning Ke and Master Qishan had discussed this question in the Lank Temple. He knew that there was no answer to this question. If he really thought about it, the answer could only point to the cold side. No one has gone to Haotian's divine kingdom and then returned. Your youngest uncle might have taken a look but forgot to leave a few words. So I did not have an answer to this question before. The headmaster looked at the blue sky and white clouds above the wilderness and said slowly, I finally saw the answer when I saw the divine general of light on the golden chariot. Ning Ke asked, what is the answer? The answer is on his face. The headmaster said, his face is too perfect. There is no perfect thing in the world, so he is not real. His perfection comes from thousands of old friends, so he is not one of my old friends. The headmaster was a little depressed and emotional. He seemed to be recalling many things of the past. Then he retracted his gaze and looked at Ning Quebec. He said, I saw the unified consciousness of Haotian on his face, but not the individual consciousness. I saw eternity, so I also saw death. This was a simple world, and these were simple truths. However, before the headmaster said it, even if Ning Ke had lived 2 lives and seen the most bizarre things in the world, he could not think of these problems. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, have other cultivators never thought of these problems? When we were at the back of the mountain of the academy, you once told me that Haotian would laugh once humans were thinking. But in fact, there were many humans who didn't care about being laughed at by Haotian. Many cultivators before and after me were thinking, and many of them had the same doubts as me. The headmaster walked down the meadow and said, why did Lu Bai not dare to take that step? Why did he hide in the sword garret all these years? Why did the great divine priest of light betray the West Hill divine palace and come to this wilderness to establish the devil's doctrine? These are all related to these doubts. Hearing about the great divine priest of light who established the devil's doctrine, Ning Ke could not help but think of the West Hill divine palace. He asked, Haotian Taoism is the closest to Haotian. The sublime beings in Haotian Taoism should have a deep understanding of this. Has no one doubted Haotian other than the great divine priest of light for tens of thousands of years? Haotian Taoism seeks to ascend to heaven and become an immortal. Being led to Haotian's divine kingdom and returning to the origin of the world is their greatest happiness. It is also the ultimate goal of their survival and struggle. This is what they yearn for. Why should they be suspected? The headmaster looked at him and said, however, for many other cultivators, to live eternally with Haotian or to die alone has always been a question. To live or to die alone was a question. To live eternally with Haotian or to die alone was also a question. However, could there be an answer to all the questions? Ning Ke once again thought of what Master Lotus had said at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Look at this dirty world. Who knows how many mediocre idiots are living in it? Don't you feel that the air you breathe is so dirty and stinky? Don't you feel that it's very difficult to breathe when you're covered by a despicable sky that has been silent for so many years? It's natural for people to eat meat in this world. They eat pigs, dogs, chickens, and heaven and earth. There's no logic to it. In my opinion, the way you and I exist in this world is the combination of our understanding of the world. After that night of bitter rain in the tomb, I have been trying hard to understand the origin of the real world. In the end, I changed the way I exist in this world. Finally, I want to change this world and find the world that I can no longer return to. I only pursue power and find a way to change the world. I don't care about the difference between Taoism and demonic Tao, nor do I care who wins or loses. The reason why I'm willing to come to the Devil's sect is because I want to see the lost heavenly book. I went to the great river of the South Jin Kingdom, to the Yueluan Kingdom, and finally to the west, to the distant unknown place. In the Xiankong Temple, I finally heard the preaching of the chief monk, saw the Buddha's light, and heard the deafening words of Buddha. However, after a few years, I finally found that the monks in the Xiankong Temple were just some filthy things. The so-called words of Buddha were deliberately mystifying, and they were no different from the fortune-tellers on the streets of the Kingdom of Song. What was more disgusting was that the Buddhism sect cultivated themselves so that they could only wait humbly in the face of the transfer of fate. I thought I had finally found the right place and had a chance to see the real world. But I didn't expect that after staying on Peach Mountain for a few days, I found that the West Hill Divine Palace is a bunch of cowardly idiots. They were all a bunch of dogs. So what if it was that rundown monastery? In the end, he was still Haotian's dog. They were all dogs. In the past, Ning Ke had always thought that what Master Lotus said was just some crazy talk. It was not until now that he finally understood how amazing this sublime being from the Devil's Doctrine, who was well versed in both Buddhism and Taoism, was. Master Lotus had always stood at the top of the cultivation world. His purpose of survival was to point to this old world and to create a new world. He was not much different from the headmaster of the academy and youngest uncle. It was just that the methods he chose and the means he used were bloodier and colder. Ning Ke knew that he might not be qualified to make this choice in his lifetime, because he might never be able to reach Master Lotus's level. But he thought about it carefully and realized that if he really had to face this choice, he might choose the same answer and method as Lotus. Master Lotus was amazing, but his teacher was even more amazing. He already knew how Lotus would choose, and he could also guess what his teacher would choose. But he did not know what his teacher would do. "Teacher, what would you do?" he asked. The headmaster of the academy asked, "What did Lotus intend to do?" Ning Ke said, he intended to destroy the old world, create a new world, and then fight against the way of heaven. The headmaster of the academy shook his head and said, "After all, it's about eating and being eaten. Since the way of heaven doesn't eat people, why drag billions of ordinary people into this war?" At this moment, the teacher and disciple had already walked to the bottom of the meadow. The water in the pot was already boiling, and the chopping board was filled with freshly cut lamb. Sang Sang raised her arm to wipe the sweat off her forehead and said happily, "We can eat now." The three of them began to eat the mutton hot pot. Mutton hot pot needs fresh meat. Frozen meat is much worse. The headmaster of the academy took out some sweet garlic and chewed it crisply. He touched his stomach with satisfaction and looked at Ning Quebec. He said, "I am a person who likes to eat." Ning Ke thought that if he used a more concise word to describe him, he would be a foodie. The headmaster of the academy picked up his chopsticks and scooped in the pot of water. He was a little disappointed to find that there was no more mutton. Then he pointed his chopsticks to the sky and said, "Since I like to eat, of course I don't like to be eaten by others. Why do I have to fight against the way of heaven? Because it wants to eat me. Then I have to think of a way not to be eaten by it. How can you not be eaten by it?" The headmaster of the academy put a piece of frozen tofu into Sung Sung's bowl. He looked at the little girl who lowered her head to eat the meat and sighed. He said, "This is indeed a very troublesome problem." Ning Ke pushed away the big black horse who was trying to snatch the meat from his bowl. He suddenly thought of a possibility. He looked at the sun above his head and said, "If Haotian needs to eat, he can just eat the sun. Why does he need to eat the chi of heaven and earth?" The wilderness was located in the cold north. Although it was spring, the sun still could not burn brightly. It was faint like a painting. The headmaster of the academy raised his chopsticks to the sky again and pointed at the sun. He said, "What if this is fake?" Writing this chapter, I thought back to the more than 10 chapters of being possessed by the devil in the second volume. I am very emotional. This kind of work may not be very effective at the time, but in the end, it will give people a sense of satisfaction. Ning Ke will inherit the headmaster of the academy's great wish and Kuharan spirit. But as Lotus said before his death, Ning Ke will inherit his mantle. Lotus has a very important influence on Ning Ke and Ning Ke in the second half of the story. There will be more today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 686. Ning Ke had been in a state of extreme anxiety since the light of Buddha fell on the Lang temple. It was not until the headmaster appeared in the wilderness that he finally felt relaxed and safe. However, he did not expect that the headmaster would bring him into a series of mysterious and depressing discussions. His spirit once again became extremely tense and anxious. He had finally thought of a possibility that could make this gloomy world a little brighter, but he did not expect his teacher's reply to be so cold and indifferent. Furthermore, he seemed to be deducing even more terrifying descriptions of the world. He finally could not take it anymore and collapsed on the spot. He jumped up and waved his arms, shouting angrily, "How can it be fake? It rises in the east and sets in the west every day. Chang'an is so hot in the summer. How can it be fake?" The headmaster was shocked by his reaction and said, "It's just a discussion. Do you have to be so excited?" Ning Ke was still very excited and said, "How can I not be excited? It's fine if Haotian wants to eat people. Now you want me to believe that the sun is fake. Then is this world also fake? Don't tell me that I have lived in this world for so many years just for a dream. I won't believe you even if you say something beautiful. How can it be fake? I have raised her for so many years. Did I raise her for nothing?" The headmaster thought to himself, "You're still only concerned about whether the girl was raised for nothing when you're in such an agitated, angry state. You're really unfilial." He said angrily, "The sun is fake, but it doesn't mean that you and I are fake." Ning Ke pointed to the dim sun above the wilderness and said, "This can't be fake. What is sunlight? That is Haotian's divine light. Why can't Haotian eat this? Why does it have to eat the chi of heaven and earth? Have you ever thought that the Haotian's divine light emitted by the sun is not Haotian's food, but Haotian's external form? Just like our external form is human flesh. Do we have to eat human flesh? What can't it do if it's hungry? Haotian is happy to eat his own food. Who cares? The problem is that it has other things to eat. Why does it eat itself? Does it have a unique taste? Even if Haotian can eat divine light, the divine light comes from itself. Can it eat it forever? This is the simplest calculation problem. I didn't say that the sun is Haotian herself. That's what you said. In my opinion, the sun emits light and heats up. It's the source of all nutrients. Why doesn't Haotian eat it? The quarrel between the headmaster and Ning Ke became fiercer and fiercer, and they spoke faster and faster. Their spittle flew all over the meadow. Sang Sang did not know how to persuade them, so she lowered her head to clean up the dishes and put out the fire. Does the solar energy always emit light and heat? A few billion years should not be a problem. Why can it keep emitting light and heat? This involves some rather esoteric principles. I can't explain it to you in a short time. Fine. Even if what you said makes sense, and the sun can emit light and heat for billions of years, what about billions of years later? One meal can last for billions of years. What's there to be dissatisfied about? Then can you explain clearly why there is no sun during the everlasting night? Ning Ke did not speak because he just remembered that they were in the world of Haotian, not the world that he was once familiar with and had gradually forgotten. Seeing that he was speechless, the headmaster stroked his beard and said proudly, "There are loopholes in your inference after all. It's not as reasonable as my design. When I started thinking about these things, you were still in Li Sanyang's belly. So just listen to me. What's the point of arguing other than wasting time?" Ning Ke said, "Don't mention my mother. Although you are my teacher, if you mention my mother again, I will fall out with you." The headmaster said, "Why?" Ning Ke said, "When my parents were killed, you were watching in the academy. You didn't say anything about saving them." The headmaster said, "So many people die every day. Do I have to save every one of them? You know that I will be your student in the future. Why didn't you save them? Did you think that if I saved them, I might not be your student anymore? Isn't that a little too vicious? Everyone will die. Your parents' death is God's will. I can't interfere. Teacher, what have you been doing all your life? You are going against God's will. Why don't you interfere with God's will?" "Because I can't see what the real God's will is. Of course, I have to be careful. What if I interfere and God's will falls on me? What should I do then?" "In that case, you feel that your own life is more important than the lives of others." "That's right. So selfish that it's just? I am too important to the human world. My selfishness is selflessness. I suddenly understand something." "What is it?" "I understand where youngest uncle and second brother's pride and narcissism comes from." "Stop arguing." Sang Sang finally could not stand the master and disciple. She looked at them and said seriously, "I don't understand what you are talking about. I just want to know, where are we going next?" The black horse carriage came to a very cold place. The cold wind was angry, the dark night was like a curtain, and the stars were dim. It was the cold region of the far north, by the hot sea. However, the surface of the hot sea had been frozen for a long time. No one knew how deep the snow was, so it was more accurate to call it the snow sea. Although the big black horse was not an ordinary animal, it was also frozen by the cold here. It shivered and hid in the carriage to avoid the wind and snow blowing from the hot sea. The headmaster led Ning Ke and Sang Sang to the hot sea. Wherever they stepped, the snow that was almost as high as a man rustled, and then was blown to both sides by the wind, revealing a passage. The headmaster didn't stop until they reached the depths of the sea. He stretched out his hand and pointed to the surface of the sea. A hole about the size of a bucket appeared in the hard ice. It was dozens of feet deep and reached the bottom of the sea that had not been completely frozen. Sang Sang tightened her fur coat and ran to the hole. She held a wooden basin and waited. Her breath turned into frost. Not long after, a few plump and tender fish jumped out of the ice cave and landed in the wooden basin. He did not know what method the headmaster had used to make these fish pass through the ice that was dozens of feet thick. The headmaster's expression turned serious and he shouted, "What are you waiting for?" Ning Ke's heart tightened. He gently pinched 2 fingers on his left hand and a fire talisman broke through the wind and snow. It accurately fell on the wooden basin and released a blazing warmth, separating the fish from the cold air. Seeing this, the headmaster nodded with satisfaction and said, "The peony fish can be frozen. When it is 70% thawed, it will taste the best. But the temperature of the sea is too low now. If you are not careful, you will freeze too much. Judging from your talisman Taoism skills, you are qualified to eat this fish. Sang Sang's cooking skills were very ordinary, but her knife skills were very accurate, just like her inhuman calculation ability. In a moment, there were many snowflake-like slices of fish on the felt board. Piled together, it looked like there were many white peony flowers growing on the wooden felt board. They were in a tent abandoned by the desolate man. With the support of Ning Kei's fire talisman and some thick wood, the temperature in the tent was relatively pleasant. Sang Sang's knife skills are much better than Manman's. The headmaster praised. Ning Kei arranged the bowls and chopsticks and was ready to eat. He felt that he had eaten a little too much in a day. Although he had been eating the best food in the world with his teacher, it was still too heavy for him to carry too many banknotes. The headmaster mixed soy sauce, ginger juice, and a green seasoning. He picked up a piece of fish and put it into his mouth like a willow branch brushing the lake. After a moment, he opened his eyes and sighed, "This fish is not as fat and tender as before. We can only make do with it. Speaking of which, the hot sea is almost frozen to the bottom. I wonder how many peony fish are left." Hearing this, Ning Kei could not bear to lift his chopsticks. Or maybe it was because he was too full. He said, "Teacher, since there are not many peony fish left in the hot sea, isn't it a pity to eat them like this?" The headmaster scolded, "Idiot, it is precisely because there are not many left that we have to eat them quickly. Otherwise, where can we eat them when they are extinct?" Ning Kei said with a smile, "It's better to be frozen to death than to be eaten raw like this." The headmaster said, "As such delicious fish, being eaten by us is of course the best ending for them." Ning Kei thought, why don't I see being eaten by Haotian as the best ending? The peony fish was delicious, but the portion was small. Soon, the three of them finished it. Most of it naturally went into the headmaster's stomach. Perhaps feeling a little ashamed, the headmaster generously used his divine power to melt 2 hot springs in some depression in the frozen snow sea for everyone to enjoy. The hot steam rose and the water was slightly hot. Beside the pools were the rocks and snow. The scene was extremely beautiful under the starlight. Ning Kei felt very comfortable soaking in the hot water. Sang Sang sat beside him and said softly, "Don't always quarrel with the headmaster." After a moment of silence, Ning Kei said, "Quarreling is just for fun. I always feel that something is wrong." Sang Sang widened her eyes and asked confusedly, "What is it?" Ning Kei said, "Don't you think the headmaster's behavior is strange? He brought us to eat so much delicious food and talked so much. Why didn't he say this when we were in the academy?" Sang Sang asked, "What are you trying to say?" Ning Kei looked at her and said, "I always feel that the headmaster is telling me his last words, just like when you were in Tile Mountain." Sang Sang was slightly startled and then said softly, "What are you thinking?" Ning Kei frowned slightly and said, "I hope I'm just imagining it. As a disciple of the academy, we firmly believe that our teacher is the strongest. Especially after this, I'm even more certain that no one can threaten him except Haotian. But I don't know why, I just feel that something is wrong. And, continue writing. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 687. The hot spring in the snow made a gurgling sound. It was impossible for there to be fish in the slightly hot water, so it was the air hole that was spitting bubbles. Ning Kei thought about how his headmaster had melted into the hot spring without missing such a detail. Thinking about his previous vigilance and uneasiness, his emotions became more and more complicated. He was silent for a long time. Sang Sang felt the change in his mood. She held his arm and leaned her head on his shoulder. She did not speak as she had done in the past years, but made sure that he could confirm her existence when he was sad or sad. After her hair was cut short, it was no longer as yellow and thin as when she was a child. It had become darker, and now it was wet and stuck to her cheeks, which made her look more beautiful. Because of the silence and strange emotions in the hot spring, and the unknown fear of parting, Ning Ke felt that his arms were very empty. He wanted to hug her, so he held Sang Sang tightly in his arms. The two hugged each other in the hot spring, and then they began to kiss and touch. "You are not married yet, right?" At this moment, the headmaster's voice came from the hot spring next door. Sang Sang was awakened and quickly left his arms. She lifted the towel that had slipped out of her arms and put it on her slightly bulging chest. Her face was slightly red, not knowing whether it was because of shyness or heat. Ning Ke turned to look at Empress Snow and shouted, "You approve the engagement." The headmaster said, "Engagement and marriage are two different concepts." Ning Ke said, "Isn't it just a procedure of bowing to heaven and earth? It's a snowy night. I'll just say goodbye to her." The headmaster said, "Why do you need to bow to heaven and earth when I'm here? And Haotian, it may not like the two of you to really get married." Ning Ke laughed. He thought that Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama. It was indeed inappropriate for him to get Haotian's blessing and approval when he married her. Then he suddenly thought of the worry he had mentioned to Sang Sang before. He thought silently, could it be that the headmaster had already confirmed the uneasiness in advance, so he wanted to see me get married before he left? The stars in the night sky became brighter. In the bay by the snow sea, the white mist was rising. There were no red candles and no receptionists. There was only the headmaster standing on the pile of snow and a pair of children kneeling under it. This scene was like a fairyland, but it was a pity that the three people in the fairyland were not dressed neatly. They did not seem to have anything to do with the legendary immortals. The headmaster was wrapped in a large towel. It was freezing cold, but his body was still steaming like a boiled fish. The water dripping from the edge of the towel froze when it touched the ground. Ning Ke and Sang Sang knelt under the snow and kowtowed 3 times to the headmaster of the academy. They straightened up with snow on their foreheads, only to find that the headmaster was no longer on the pile of snow. There was only a wet towel that was about to be frozen. The headmaster's voice came from the depths of the snow sea along with the sound of horse hooves. "Have a good time in the bridal room. No one will disturb you. I'm going out on horseback to play for a while." It was a silent night. When Ning Ke woke up, it was still dark outside. He thought for a while and realized that the hot sea was almost in the everlasting night. It was difficult to see the sun. Sang Sang was still sleeping. She seemed to be dreaming of something. She arched her head in his arms and grinned, showing 2 white front teeth. She looked as cute as a gray rabbit. There was an extremely fragrant smell outside the tent. Ning Ke knew that his teacher was back. He quickly woke Sang Sang up and began to wash and dress. The headmaster used the leftover peony fish bones from last night to make a pot of fish porridge. Sang Sang lifted the heavy blanket and walked out of the tent. She could not help but shiver in the cold wind. She walked to the pot and took over the cooking from the headmaster's hands. Her slightly shy expression gradually turned into calmness. Compared to Sang Sang's calmness, Ning Ke had a silly smile on his face for a long time. He was still smiling even when Sang Sang went to the hot spring to clean up the dishes. The headmaster picked up the tail bone of the peony fish and looked at him. He said, "You are only in your early 20s. Why do I feel like you are an old house on fire?" Ning Ke coughed and said, "We have been together for more than 10 years. It's not as exaggerated as you say." The headmaster suddenly lowered his voice and asked curiously, "How do you feel?" Ning Ke looked at the fish tail bone in his hand and said helplessly, "Look at you now. You don't look like the headmaster of the academy. You can't be disrespectful just because you are old, right?" The headmaster threw the fish bone into the snow and said, "It's not that I don't have a voyeuristic fetish. It's just that you are too rare. You should know that your bridal room with her will definitely be recorded in the history books. So you have to remember the details." Ning Ke did not understand what the headmaster meant. He was also a little tired, so he went to sleep again. The big black horse was also taking a nap in the tent. It had galloped for hundreds of miles on the snow sea last night and was very tired. It also felt very ashamed. Although the headmaster was not an ordinary person, it was still shameful to be ridden by a naked old man for a whole night. At noon, the hot sea was still dark and the sun could not be found. They left the settlement abandoned by the desolate man's tribe and continued to head north. As far as Ning Ke knew, the northernmost point of the world that humans had reached was this cold region in the extreme north, which was the northern edge of the hot sea. So he was very curious about what the world in the north looked like. He also did not understand why so many powerful humans in history had not explored the north of the hot sea. Until he saw the snow-capped peak. When he was at the hot sea yesterday, he had looked to the north but did not see anything. However, not far from the hot sea today, the snow-capped peak came into his sight. It was as if he had bumped into it, which was extremely strange. The snow-capped peak was steep and towering, emitting a faint light under the starlight. It was unknown how high it was. Looking from the snowfield, it seemed that the peak was about to pierce the night sky. Ning Ke had been to many famous mountains and rivers. The most famous and dangerous one was naturally the northern foot of Min Mountain, or Tianqi Mountains. However, compared to this snow-capped peak, Tianqi Mountain was much shorter. If you go north from any place in the south, you will reach this snow-capped peak as long as you keep walking. The headmaster looked up at the snow-capped peak under the starlight and said, when the hot sea was full of sunshine, this snow-capped peak would look even more spectacular. No one could climb it with human strength alone. So this is the northernmost point. Ning Ke noticed two key points in this sentence. First, no matter where you went north, you would reach the snow-capped peak. Second, no one could climb it with human strength alone. Then could anyone who could climb it still be considered a human? When the black horse carriage appeared on the other side of the snow-capped peak, in front of a dark sea, Ning Ke looked at the tall back of the headmaster and thought about this question. It was a vast sea. The reason why the sea was black was because there was no blue sky and no sunlight. Although the stars were clearer and brighter, there were fewer of them. Ning Ke knew that what he saw was a place that had never been recorded in any ancient books. So he was very shocked. What shocked him even more was that there was a ship in this black sea. This ship was so big that the big black horse could gallop on the deck. Ning Ke stood by the side of the ship and looked at the snow-capped peak under the night sky. He was shocked speechless. The headmaster walked to his side and looked up at the dark night sky. He said, the night begins here and gradually spreads to the south. Ning Ke looked at him and asked, Teacher, this ship is, the headmaster said, many years ago, I was worried that Haotian would find me and eat me. I kept thinking about how to escape and hide. I thought that since this was the beginning of the night, it should be the closest to the underworld. The Yama King's power was the strongest and Haotian's power could hardly reach here. So I built a big boat here and prepared to escape here if Haotian came to eat me. I would ride the boat on the Black Sea and never go out. Ning Ke was stunned. Through these words, he could imagine how anxious and uneasy the headmaster had been living in Haotian's world for the past 1,000 years. Later, I became stronger and no longer had to worry about being found and eaten by Haotian. Naturally, this boat was useless. However, I suddenly found that the night here was very clean and suitable for stargazing, so I came back again. I really took a boat trip to the depths of the ocean once. I didn't expect that trip to let me discover some very interesting things. What is it? This world is not flat. Teacher, I don't understand what you mean. I brought you to this ship to let you understand. Understand what? The headmaster said, why do I have to fight against heaven? Because Haotian wants to eat me. But even the drunkard and the butcher could hide for so many years. I can do the same. If worst comes to worst, I can close my eyes and die like Buddha. The reason why I have to fight against heaven is because I think there is something more important. What is it? When I was at the back of the mountain of the academy, I said that I had seen sunsets and sunrises in many places in this world, including this ocean. At that time, there was a sunrise here. Under the sunlight, this ocean was transparent and looked like an endless abyss. The sun set in this ocean. You said that the moon is a reflection of the sun. I said that the sun does not really rise and set. I even said that if this world was a ball, it would be easy. Now it seems that at least what I said before is that this sun is fake. Other than watching the sun, I have also watched the stars. I have watched the stars at the back of the mountain of the academy and on this big ship. Because there are fewer stars here and they are bright and clear. I told you that no matter how many years ago or how many years later, these stars have always stayed in their original positions and have not changed at all. Later on, you made a stargazing mirror. When you looked in the mirror, the size of the stars did not change, unlike people and scenery that can be magnified. This means that the positions of the stars in the night sky are fixed. They are infinitely far away from the ground but infinitely close. It cannot be measured by distance. Teacher, can you make it simpler? Simply put, this is a closed world. More simpler? This is a world without boundaries. Didn't you say that it is closed? Only when there is no boundary and it is always connected can it be considered closed. The night sky where the stars are is not the boundary. No one can touch it, so it is not the real boundary. It is just the boundary in your eyes and heart. Teacher, the more you say, the more confused I am. Hao Tian doesn't want the boundary to be broken, so it refuses to let people see the boundary. So it proves that this is a closed world. You are back to it. Yes, just like this world. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 688. The academy was indeed the best in the world in all aspects. The headmaster of the academy could be so calm and elegant even when he was being sarcastic. He could make people want to vomit blood at any moment, but they just could not. Ning Ke truly felt this, so he wisely stopped arguing with his teacher. He pointed at the star in the dark sky and said, "If the position of the star is far enough, then it will be small enough. If the position of the star is far enough, then it will be small enough. Even if it becomes larger in the telescope, it will be very difficult to see with the naked eye. Therefore, your inference is not that tenable. If it is far enough and small enough, then why can we see it from the ground?" The headmaster of the academy touched the cold side of the ship and looked up at the few lonely stars. He seemed to recall something from the past and said with a smile, "Many years ago, I once flew into the sky." It was the first time that Ning Ke knew that his teacher had done such a fearless thing. He imagined the scene of his teacher riding the wind and flying into the sky. He was extremely shocked and asked, "Why did you fly?" The headmaster of the academy turned to look at him and said, "If you see a mountain, will you want to know what is behind it? If you see a high wall, will you want to know what is behind it?" Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "I will always be curious." The headmaster of the academy smiled and said, "I am also curious. I want to know how high the sky is and if there is a boundary to this world. I want to know how far those stars are." Ning Ke was inexplicably nervous and asked in a slightly hoarse voice, "And then?" The headmaster of the academy said, "I flew for a long time, but the sky was still so high and the stars were still the same. What puzzled me even more was that the ground under my feet seemed to be the same as before." "How long did you fly for? What happened in the end?" "There were days and nights in the sky, but I was not in the mood to count the years at that time. There were eagles and then white clouds in the blue sky. In the end, there was nothing and I was the only one left." The headmaster of the academy said, "I was very lonely and my heart gradually became uncertain. I also felt tired and weary. Then I turned around and flew back. When I landed on the ground again, I realized that more than 30 years had passed." Other than shock and yearning, Ning Ke could not feel any other emotions. In the rules of the world he was familiar with, the atmosphere covered the ground. The headmaster of the academy had flown for such a long time that he should have flown out of the atmosphere, or even out of the solar system. However, the headmaster of the academy's experience was different. This seemed to indicate that the headmaster of the academy's guess was correct. This was a closed, borderless world, but how was such a world constructed? The Mobius strip? He said to himself. The headmaster had never heard of this term and asked, "What ring?" Sang Sang had been standing silently by the side, listening to their conversation. At this time, she remembered that Ning Ke had told her about this kind of ring when she was young. She said, "There is only one side to a piece of paper. You can't walk out of it no matter how hard you try." The headmaster raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "Why does a piece of paper only have one side?" Ning Ke came to his senses and said, "Her statement is not accurate, but the general meaning is similar." The headmaster's eyes lit up. He looked at him and said, "Teach me." Ning Ke said, "Okay." The big ship left the coast and sailed into the dark ocean, continuing north. The snow-capped peak, which was said to be the northernmost peak in the world, gradually disappeared from their sight. To be more precise, it became shorter in their sight. Something else appeared in their sight. It was a bright red sun jumping out of the sea. Just as the headmaster of the academy had said, the sun suddenly appeared without any warning. Ning Ke did not expect to see the sunrise further north of the dark ocean. He was shocked speechless by this scene and could not understand it no matter how hard he tried. The big ship continued north, and they saw the sun more and more often. The sun stayed in the sky longer and longer, and the dark ocean gradually turned into a beautiful deep blue. As time passed, there was no longer only ocean around the big ship. Snowy islands and swimming fish began to appear. One day, they even saw the coastline. The headmaster of the academy took them ashore to see the scenery on the shore. Then they boarded the ship again and continued north. Along the way, they went to the cold plateau, saw the uninhabited land covered with moss, saw all kinds of strange animals, and saw the mirror-like Great Salt Lake. This was a strange world without any classics. The headmaster of the academy took them to many beautiful places and ate a lot of food that they had never eaten before. Of course, the food was delicious. One day, Ning Ke asked, "Teacher, have you been to these places before?" The headmaster of the academy said, "I have been to many places in order to find the underworld and the edge of the world. Sometimes I took your eldest brother with me, and sometimes I traveled alone." Ning Ke asked, "Why do you want to find the edge of the world?" The headmaster of the academy glanced at the blue sky and said, "In order to find the edge of the world, I have even been to the sky. Do you think I don't want to know the true appearance of the land under my feet?" Ning Ke then realized that he had asked a very stupid question. He said, "Where is the edge of the world?" The headmaster of the academy said, "This world has no edge." Ning Ke said, "The universe is infinite. This is normal." The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said with a smile, "But you know that this world is not infinite." Ning Ke could only remain silent. The big ship sailed on the sea and never encountered a storm. It fished, fed the seagulls, basked in the sun, and drank the wine that had been stored in the cabin for many years. It was a happy life, but Ning Ke always felt uneasy. The headmaster of the academy did not have any reaction. Other than enjoying life, he only did two things every day. He taught Sang Sang to cook the best food in the world and to enjoy the best things in the world. Then he ordered Ning Ke to teach him many things that did not exist in this world. Those things were knowledge that did not belong to this world. Ning Ke cut the paper tape and talked about the Mobius ring. He used a pen to draw a three-dimensional picture on the paper and described more variations. He also talked about many things about physics. However, when he came to this world, he was still young. No matter how good his academic performance was, what he could teach was very shallow. The headmaster of the academy did not ask where he got this knowledge from, and Ning Ke did not say either. The two of them seemed to have formed some kind of tacit understanding, or they already knew each other. After sailing on the sea for dozens of days, ships finally appeared on the sea. The ships quickly became crowded. The big black horse, who had been bored for a long time, stretched its head out of the side of the ship and looked at the familiar humans. It neighed happily, which scared the people on the ships. 1,000 sails sailed on the blue waves. This was a very beautiful scene. Ning Ke looked at this scene and became very silent. Although he was mentally prepared, he still found it hard to accept. Through the conversation with the people on the ships, he knew that they would reach the southernmost port of the Great River Kingdom if they went north for dozens of miles. In other words, they had returned to the human world. After leaving the wilderness, the big ship had been sailing north. How did it come to the south? The headmaster of the academy did not use his great divine power. Then how did it happen? Ning Ke looked at the sails on the sea in the distance and murmured, "If we didn't see the tip of the sail first and then the hull, it means that this world is indeed flat. Then how did we come back?" The headmaster of the academy walked to him with a glass of wine in his hand and said, "Back in the back mountain of the academy, we once discussed this question. I said that if it was a ball, it could explain many phenomena. But since the world we are in is not a ball, nor is it flat, then it can only mean that it is distorted. Just like the ring you mentioned." Ning Ke said, "I have never seen such a strange world." The headmaster of the academy took a sip of wine and said, "What kind of world have you seen?" Ning Ke looked at the deep meaning in his teacher's eyes and did not know what to say. The headmaster of the academy said, "I have said before that you have seen other worlds in your dreams. Can you describe that world?" Ning Ke was silent for a long time and then said, "The world in my dream also has a sun." "What does that sun look like?" "It is similar to this sun, but I can be sure that the sun in my dream is real. It is a big fireball that can burn for many years. The energy and nutrients of the human world basically come from it. As for why it can burn for such a long time, it comes from the formula that I told you a few days ago." "Oh, that simple and beautiful formula that is infinitely vast." "Yes, the human beings in my dream also live on a ball. The reason why they do not fall is because there is gravity between all things." "Yes, teacher." Time passed slowly as the teacher and disciple discussed. This was the first time that the headmaster of the academy had come into contact with another world, and it was also the first time that Ning Ke talked about that world to someone else. The listener was filled with emotion, and the speaker was also filled with emotion. Night fell on the sea, and the night sky was filled with stars. Ning Ke looked at the night sky and said, "In the world in my dream, there are stars in the night sky, but those stars are all moving. They move in our sight mainly because of the earth under our feet. In fact, in the infinitely distant universe, they are also moving." The headmaster of the academy sighed and said, "A world that is constantly changing must be full of vitality." Ning Ke said, "The biggest difference is actually not the stars, but the moon." He pointed at the night sky and said, "If there are no clouds at night, people can see the moon. Sometimes it is round like a pancake, and sometimes it is thin like a loofah." He did not explain why the moon waxed and waned, because he knew that the headmaster would definitely understand. The headmaster of the academy looked up at the night sky, as if he saw a bright moon appear there. He smiled and said, "A bright moon born in the eternal night. That must be a beautiful scene. With my low IQ and low level of knowledge, I actually want to play with the structure of the world. This is really a strenuous and unrewarding thing. It is pure self-abuse. I will never do this in this life. I admit to everyone that I really can't write today. My brain is full of straw. Only this chapter. I always feel that if I go on like this, there is a possibility that I will drop the ball. I am indeed a person who needs to be forced, so in the first 2 months, I would say in advance how many chapters one will write tomorrow. I didn't say it recently because I once said that I would write 4 chapters the next day, but I ended up taking a leave the next day. I felt that it was too embarrassing, so I didn't dare to continue doing this. But it seems that I have to do it now. 3 chapters tomorrow. 3 chapters the day after tomorrow. I will apply for a break on the 22nd the day after tomorrow. 2 chapters the day after tomorrow, 3 on Saturday, 4 on Sunday. I have to say it first, and I have to crush myself to death. To avoid the disgusting situation of not keeping my promise again. Dang 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 dang. I invite the cat family killer. Never bankrupt, always vigorous, my old master's character guarantees. Finally, I will talk about the content of the story of Jiang Yi. I love the headmaster very much. This chapter is very beautiful. Other than the last point, I also want to say that the things that the headmaster did in the past were very beautiful, especially when he flew into the sky. Finally, I wish Miss Ilan a happy birthday, and continue loving with the Taoist priest. Finally, I wish my most obedient girl, Tang Tang, a happy birthday on behalf of my leader. During dinner at night, the leader sent a text message wishing you a quick birth. Your speed in replying text messages almost made us drop our bowls of noodles. Don't be so scary in the future, the number of words above is free. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 689. When Sang Sang was very young, she would occasionally hear Ning Ke talk about the moon, Miss Kikyu, dogs and so on. She would also hear him talk about rings and bottles, but she was not very interested in them. Later, Ning Ke gradually stopped mentioning these things and she gradually forgot about them. However, the word moon would still be mentioned by Ning Ke every now and then. She always thought it was nonsense. Until tonight, when she stood beside the headmaster and listened for a long time, she finally realized that it was not nonsense but sleep talk. She raised her head and tucked her hair that had been messed up by the sea breeze behind her temples. She followed the gaze of the headmaster and Ning Ke and looked at the night sky, thinking that if there was a bright thing there, it would indeed be very beautiful. The South Sea under the illumination of the stars was quiet and gentle. The sea breeze was slightly warm and the waves were gently floating. It was like a cradle shaking its head like a baby's big ship. From the north of the wilderness, they continued north until they came to the south of the world. Ning Ke had seen too much and eaten too much in the past dozens of days. He had also heard a lot from the headmaster, but he always felt that something was wrong. His eyes suddenly brightened and he said, I always feel that I have seen it somewhere. What is it called? The headmaster was slightly surprised and asked, what world? Ning Ke shook his head and said, I forgot where I saw it and I also forgot the name. I only remember that it was a fake world, and the hero in the story was desperately rowing the boat to the side. Many of the memories in that world had become blurred. He tried his best to recall and then told the headmaster of the academy all the details that he remembered. After listening, the headmaster thought silently for a moment. He took out a short wooden stick from his sleeve and knocked on Ning Ke's head heavily. He scolded, Idiot, do you think we are putting on a show for others? Ning Ke first saw the headmaster on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes in Chang'an City. At that time, he was knocked unconscious by this famous stick. Now that he was hit again, he could not help but feel annoyed. He could not understand where the headmaster usually hid this stick, but he did not have time to think about it. He pointed to the night sky above his head and said, Maybe Haotian is up there watching us. It's not impossible. Of course not. The headmaster said, the world we live in does not have the boundary in physics that you mentioned. The internal structure of the world is absolutely stable and balanced. The entropy and the law of thermodynamics that you mentioned seem to be invalid here. So according to what you said, our world is an independent world that does not have any communication with the outside world. Ning Ke nodded. The headmaster said, this inference is based on the fact that the Haotian world is the only world. What if there is another heaven beyond the heavens and there is a real world beyond the heavens? Ning Ke said, it is also possible that the Haotian world is an independent world drifting in the orbit of time. The headmaster shook his head and said, "Impossible." Ning Ke asked confusedly, "Why not?" The headmaster said, "Because it's too boring." Ning Ke was speechless. He thought to himself that such a matter-of-fact tone was indeed the temperament of the academy. If there is a sky beyond the sky, and there is another world beyond the great heaven world, or rather, the great heaven world is in a bigger world, then why can't it communicate with the outside world? The headmaster continued. Then he stretched out a finger and pointed to the night sky. Starlight fell on his slender fingertip and gradually condensed into a very faint bubble of light. According to what you have said these days, I guess the great wisdom in your dream world will probably think that the world we are in is a bubble if they know the real situation of the Haotian world. A bubble? Or a fragment of space? No, it is more appropriate to call it a bubble. A bubble floating in the outside world? Floating is not the right word. It is in the space of the outside world, but it is not in space. Teacher, I don't understand anyway. Please continue. For some reason, this bubble is not connected to the outside world. It is stable, self-consistent, independent, and even perfect. It can survive like this forever. Then? I just want to prove that your previous guess is wrong. There are no bystanders in the world of Haotian, because Haotian is also a participant. If we are acting, then it is also one of the actors. Why? If there is wisdom observing this bubble from the outside world, there will be a connection between the inside of the bubble and the outside world. Every observation will affect the state of the object being observed. Isn't this what you said a few days ago? If that is the case, the world we are in will no longer be perfect and stable. Since this has not happened, it means that there are no bystanders. Ning Ke did not know what to say. These days, he had told the headmaster of the academy the incomplete knowledge that he remembered. Who would have thought that the headmaster could remember so much and could deduce so many things so easily? Although he still did not know if the headmaster's deduction was correct, at least it sounded correct. The silver bubble of light on the headmaster's fingertip disappeared into thin air. He patted Ning Ke's shoulder and said, "I know what you are afraid of. You are afraid that all of this is just a dream or a game. That situation is indeed very annoying, but you really do not need to worry about it." Ning Ke said, "Because of your deduction, teacher?" "Not only that." The headmaster said, "No matter what kind of world we live in, as long as we are real, then the world is real." Ning Ke looked at the headmaster and praised him sincerely. "Teacher, if you live in the world of my dreams, you will definitely be the best philosopher, scientist, educator, gourmet, and revolutionary." The headmaster stroked his beard and said proudly, "So no matter where I live, it is not bad?" Ning Ke smiled and said, "It is not bad, it is extremely strong." The headmaster's eyebrows trembled slightly and he could not suppress his joy. He said, "It is hard to say about others, but I am qualified to be a gourmet." In the early morning, the sea and the fish in the sea were awakened by the bright red morning sun. After eating the oyster porridge made by Sang Sang, the headmaster brought Ning Ke to the bow of the ship to enjoy the sea breeze and sleep. Ning Ke leaned on the soft chair and pulled the blanket up. He tilted his head and drank a mouthful of coconut juice. He felt that this kind of life was extremely happy. It would be great if they could never go ashore. However, they still had to go ashore. The ship continued to sail to the north. Indistinctly, they could see the dark coastline in the distance. There was even an illusion that they could smell the smell of the dock. Going ashore meant returning to the human world. They might face many things, especially when they thought of the uneasiness that had been shrouding him. Ning Ke's mood became a little strange. Listening to the sound of the ship breaking the waves and looking at the blue sky, he was silent for a long time. He thought of the scene of the giant golden dragon absorbing the chi of heaven and earth from the corpses of the desolate men during the battle in the wilderness. The image of Haotian in his heart became more and more greedy. Ning Ke frowned and thought, because it is a closed world, energy can only flow endlessly in it. In the end, it will still go to nirvana. Haotian must understand this. Then why doesn't he break this world and go to a wider world to find a new source of energy? First of all, Haotian is the rule of this world. If this world is destroyed or connected to the outside world, it may be destroyed directly. Secondly, I think it should be afraid. The headmaster was lying on the chair, playing with a colorful shell in his hand. Ning Ke handed the coconut over and half knelt on the chair. He asked confusedly, "It is so powerful, what is it afraid of?" The headmaster took the coconut and used his hand to break off a small piece of coconut meat from the hard coconut shell. He put it into his mouth and chewed slowly. He sighed and said, "Chewing coconut meat for a long time makes it taste better than peanuts." Ning Ke was waiting for his teacher's answer and did not expect to hear such a sentence. He smiled bitterly and said, "I have never heard of anyone eating coconut meat like peanuts." The headmaster put down the coconut and said, "You asked what Haotian is afraid of? It is afraid of the unknown." Unknown? People are also afraid of the unknown. Just like how many people have never eaten coconut meat and throw it away like garbage. Many people have never eaten chili and think it is the devil. But people also yearn for the unknown. That is why there were the first people to eat crab. That is why there are people like me who like to eat coconut meat. That is why there are people who love spicy food. In the face of the unknown, there will never be a lack of people who dare to try. Because people are afraid, but also curious. The unknown and curiosity are two concepts that accompany each other. They are the most prominent characteristics of human beings. Just like what I told you that night, when we see a mountain, we always want to know what is on the other side. When we see a sea, we always want to know what is at the bottom of the sea. When we see a sky, we always want to know what is above the sky. It is because of curiosity that human beings continue to forge ahead and become more and more powerful. In this world, the starting point is the end point. It's really boring. Humans are naturally curious about the unknown. It's impossible for us to live peacefully in a closed world forever. Since the world is closed, we want to open this world and take a look at the outside world. But Haotian is not human. Although it is alive, in the final analysis, it is dry, monotonous, and boring objective rules. It is afraid of change, and has no courage to face the unknown. This is the biggest difference between us and Haotian. It is also the fundamental reason why we cannot live in harmony with it forever. A melon that is forcibly picked is not sweet. How can we get married if we have different values? How can we breathe freely when we are covered by the evil old god? So we can only pick the melon seedlings, divorce our old wives, and open up the sky. Lotus thinks so, your youngest uncle thinks so, and so do I. In fact, countless people have thought so since ancient times. Of course, we know that even if there is a sky beyond the sky, that sky may just be a bigger cage. But at least we can see more scenery and experience more things. These things may be very important, or not, but I think they are worth fighting for. Reporting to everyone, there will be a regular update on the 20th. I made a mistake. There will be no change on Saturday, and there will be a normal break. However, the number of updated chapters will not change. It is the same as yesterday's chapter. This is the first chapter, and there are 2 more chapters today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 690. The big ship landed at a port in the south of the Great River Kingdom. The black horse carriage drove onto the land and left silently. It had been more than 70 days since they left the wilderness. The Great River Kingdom in the south had also received the final news of the war in the wilderness. After the black horse carriage left the wilderness, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army suddenly launched an attack on the Tang Army. However, the Tang Army seemed to be well prepared. The Northern Military Camp's cavalry left Helan City and caught the Divine Palace Coalition Army by surprise. The flames of war once again burned in the wilderness. But this time, the war had nothing to do with the desolate. The war lasted for dozens of days. The Tang army, which was obviously at a disadvantage in terms of the number of soldiers, finally won under the personal command of His Majesty Li Zhongyi. Because the logistical supply line was too long and there were many powerful grand cultivators in the Westhill Divine Palace, the Tang army calmly did not continue to move forward after they were sure of their victory. They split into two routes and retreated to Helan City and Tiang City. The northeast border military cavalry should have reached the edge of the wilderness. What was puzzling was that after His Majesty Li Zhongyi led the northern military camp cavalry back to Helan City, he did not immediately return to Chang'an. Instead, he stayed in Helan City. Some people guessed that the Golden Palace, which had been quiet for too many years, had made a move. More people thought that the Tang Emperor just wanted to take the Empress to a place far away from Chang'an City to enjoy some quality time. Although the war in the wilderness ended with the Tang army's victory, it was a country against the world. No matter how powerful the Tang Empire was, it still paid a heavy price. As for the Westhill Divine Palace coalition army, they suffered heavy casualties. It seemed that they would not be able to start another war in a short period of time. The headmaster's battle against the heavens should have shocked the entire world. However, because of the Westhill Divine Palace's strictest blockade and the fact that everyone in the world knelt on the ground and did not dare to look directly at the bright sky, the news did not spread too far, at least outside of the Tang Empire. During the Black Horse Carriage's journey through the Great River Kingdom, the headmaster of Academy had once asked Ning Ke if he wanted to go to Mogan Mountain to have a look. Now that the master of calligraphy had brought the disciples of Black Ink Garden to the battle in the wilderness and had yet to return, there was only Mo Shanshan on Mogan Mountain. According to the headmaster of Academy's opinion, it was a great opportunity. Ning Ke understood what opportunity the headmaster was talking about, but he did not understand why the headmaster was becoming more and more disrespectful. Sang Sang was in the carriage, but the headmaster still used these words to provoke him, so he firmly refused. The Black Horse Carriage drove out of the Great River Kingdom and headed northeast. It passed through the hills in the southeast of the South Jin Kingdom and arrived at a lush and beautiful country. It was the Westhill Divine Kingdom. Opposite the Taoist temple in the small town, there was a stall selling roasted sweet potatoes. It was midsummer, and even the Westhill Divine Kingdom, which was favored by Haotian, was still very hot. The business of the stall should be very bad, but for some reason, the stall was still open, and people would come to buy it every once in a while. Eating boiled meat around a stove on a cold and snowy day, hugging ice and eating snow food on a hot summer day. This is admittedly an extremely good enjoyment at the right time, but sometimes, people should not be able to live with themselves. Eating hot pot in the heat of summer, sweating like rain, is for a carefree feeling. Chewing sweet ice in the cold of winter is also for a carefree feeling. The headmaster of Academy said, "There are many people who want to try this kind of excitement and pleasure, or should I say, self-abuse. So this stall has been open for more than 1,000 years. You should give it a try." Ning Ke bought 3 roasted sweet potatoes and peeled them with his fingers. He said, "Is there really a roasted sweet potato stall that has been open for more than 1,000 years? Isn't it an eternal business? Teacher, don't lie to us." The headmaster of Academy said, "More than 1,000 years ago, I often came down from the mountain to eat the roasted sweet potatoes here." This small town was deep in the Westhill Divine Kingdom and close to the Peach Mountain. Looking along the river from the stone bridge outside the town, one could see the magnificent Westhill Divine Palace in the Green Mountains. Was the mountain the headmaster of Academy mentioned the Peach Mountain? Ning Ke was a little surprised and forgot to continue peeling the sweet potatoes. The headmaster of Academy took the sweet potatoes from him and quickly peeled them, revealing the soft, yellow, red, and steaming sweet potato flesh. He handed it to Sang Sang and said, "I have never seen Haotian before, nor have I dealt with it directly. So I can only guess. But now it seems that my guess is getting closer and closer to the truth. That is why I feel that I am qualified to tell you the story of Haotian. Now that I have finished my story, I want to tell you some stories about me. I wonder if you too are interested." Of course, Ning Ke and Sang Sang were interested. The world only knew that the Tang Empire had the academy and the headmaster of the academy. The headmaster of academy was the highest, but few people knew the story of the headmaster of academy. Master Qishan guessed that the headmaster of academy had lived for nearly 200 years. But now Ning Kai knew that the headmaster of academy had lived for more than 1,000 years. How wonderful would 1,000 years of life be? The black horse carriage drove out of the town, crossed the stone bridge and continued along the river. The peach mountain where the West Hill Divine Palace was located appeared in their sight as the road curved. The headmaster of academy finished the roasted sweet potatoes and took the wet towel from Sang Sang. He wiped the potato flesh off his lips and beard and wiped his sticky fingers clean. He pointed to somewhere in the east outside the window and said, "Many years ago, there was a country called Lu to the east of the West Hill Divine Kingdom." Ning Kai said, "Why have I never heard of it?" The headmaster of academy said, "That was a country more than 1,000 years ago. It is long gone now." Ning Kai said, "It seems to be a small country and not very famous." The headmaster of academy said unhappily, "That's because you are ignorant and have not read any history books. If you ask those senior brothers and sisters in the back mountain, who doesn't know about Lu?" Ning Kai found that he, who was always good at flattery, had made 2 consecutive mistakes today. First, he forgot to help his teacher wipe off the food crumbs on his beard. Then, he didn't understand. Since his teacher mentioned the state of Lu at this time, he must have a great relationship with the state of Lu. His casual words were like a slap to his teacher's face. So he hurriedly apologized. The headmaster of academy ignored him and looked at the country that no longer existed. He said, "I was born in Lu." Ning Kai thought that the feelings of his homeland were indeed inviolable. The headmaster of academy said again, "I am a very ordinary person." Ning Kai thought that his words were like a slap to the face of everyone in the world. The headmaster of academy did not know that his student had been adding lines in his heart. He continued, "I was originally an ordinary person, so I was like an ordinary person. I studied and learned from a young age. Then I took the exam and worked hard to become an official. Unexpectedly, I offended a powerful official after I tried a case and was forced to resign." Ning Kai asked curiously, "What kind of case?" The headmaster of academy simply said a few words. From his expression, it was obvious that he still felt indignant about what happened in the past. "You just chopped off that person's head? Do you have any evidence?" Ning Kai asked carefully. The headmaster of academy said, "No evidence, but everyone knows that he is an evil person." Ning Kai said sarcastically, "You judged a case without evidence. I don't know how the law of the Tang Empire became the rule of the academy." "Teacher, why did you kill that person? Is he an eyesore to you?" The headmaster of academy said angrily, "I said that Haotian did not have any evidence, but he still went against it." Ning Kai said nervously, "That's because you also did not like Haotian." The headmaster of academy was stunned. After a long silence, he suddenly laughed and said, "Maybe you are wrong. I was still young back then, and my temper might have been a little bad." Ning Kai did not forget to take advantage of the headmaster of academy. He laughed and said, "Teacher, you have lived for more than 1,000 years, but your temper is not much better." The laughter stopped abruptly. Ning Kai touched the bump on his head caused by the rod and felt that he was such an idiot. He knew that the headmaster had a bad temper, but why did he still say such things? The black horse carriage arrived at the foot of the Peach Mountain. Ning Kai became a little nervous, excited and expectant. However, he was disappointed that the priests and deacons of the Divine Hall did not notice the existence of the black horse carriage. The headmaster of academy did not seem to want to go up the peach mountain to cut off the peach blossoms. He stopped the horse carriage under a big tree to enjoy the shade. "I had nothing to do after being stripped of my position. I always felt that it was inappropriate to manage the affairs of the clan. Moreover, the world was chaotic at that time, so I had to live in seclusion. I remember that I was already in my 30s. I did not know why, but I suddenly became interested in the classics of Haotian Taoism. So I began to read and cultivate. I successfully reached the initial awareness state and then the perception state. As I said before, I was just an ordinary person. My comprehension and aptitude were very ordinary. Just like ordinary cultivators, I broke through the state step by step. But when I reached the no-doubt state, I began to stagnate. In the eyes of ordinary people, even the most ordinary cultivator was great. Therefore, I was not dissatisfied with my cultivation speed. Even if I stagnated, I felt that it was normal. The clan had a lot of opinions about me being stripped of my position. But when I could cultivate, their attitude towards me suddenly changed. They sent me to the Peach Mountain to be a deacon. The headmaster of academy pointed at the divine hall outside the window and said, when I arrived at the divine hall, a deacon asked me what I wanted to do. I thought that the clan must have spent a lot of money, so I might as well buy an official position with the money. Sang Sang nodded. She felt sad and thought that it would be good to buy cosmetics. Ning Ke also felt that it made sense. He was even more curious about the headmaster's choice. He asked, "What did you choose?" The headmaster of academy said, "I thought that since I liked reading classics of Haotian Taoism, I wanted to be the manager of the library." Ning Ke slapped his thigh and said, "Good choice." The headmaster of academy looked at him in confusion. Ning Ke praised, "All the most powerful and nature-defying figures must have been a librarian." "Teacher, you did not like Haotian." "I think it was destined from then on. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 691. The headmaster had told his eldest disciple and many others that he was not omniscient or omnipotent. In many people's eyes, this was normal. However, in the eyes of eldest brother and other disciples of the academy who unconditionally and unreasonably trusted their teacher, the headmaster's evaluation of himself was obviously too modest and almost arrogant. In fact, the headmaster's understanding was very clear. For example, at this moment, he could not understand the humor in Ning Ke's words, nor could he feel the strong feelings of praise in Ning Ke's words. He thought about it and did not understand, so he decided not to spend time thinking about it and began to tell his own story. From then on, I began to be a Taoist librarian in the West Hill Divine Palace. I entered the library to read, so I naturally would not miss such a great opportunity. So I began to read non-stop. As I read more books, I was inexplicably enlightened, broke through the no-doubt state and entered the see-through state. Then, I continued to move up, and my cultivation state became good. It was at this time that I found that when I was reading every day, there was a Taoist who had been reading in the library. You must know that the Divine Hall at that time was different from the Divine Hall now. Taoists like to go to the human world to eat and drink and act like a tyrant. No one dared to control them, so the Taoist at that time did not like to read. That Taoist seemed very special. Because it was too long ago, the headmaster's memory was a little fuzzy. He thought silently for a moment and confirmed that he did not remember the wrong time sequence. He continued, "The Taoist and I read in the library for many years. Later, we read all the scriptures and books in the library. Then, we began to feel bored. At that time, the world was chaotic. Although the aristocratic families also liked to collect books, there was really nothing good. I discussed with the Taoist and thought that there were still 7 volumes of tomes of arcane in the Jishou Abbey that we had not read, so we slowed down." Ning Ke asked in surprise, "You mean, you and the Taoist went to the Jishou Abbey to read the tomes of arcane because you were so bored that you wanted to find books?" The headmaster said, "At that time, I was still not very interested in cultivation. If it were not for the fact that the 7 volumes of tomes of arcane were absolutely unique, why would I think of going to the deep mountains to find the Jishou Abbey?" Ning Ke was speechless. He found it really difficult to understand the way people thought 1,000 years ago. And then? Everyone in the West Hill Divine Palace knows about the Jishou Abbey, but they don't know where it is. The Taoist and I thought it would be difficult to find it, but we found it so easily. That's because you and that Taoist are not ordinary people. And then? And then? Of course, he was reading in the Jishou Abbey. The Taoists in the monastery definitely won't let us see, so we can only sneak a peek. As long as they don't find out, it's fine. You've read all 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane? If there were more scrolls, I would naturally be able to read more. Please continue with your story. The 7 scrolls of Tomes of Arcane are very interesting. However, the more we read, the more puzzled the Taoist and I became. Especially after we finished reading the Ming hand scroll, we started to have some doubts about this world. The headmaster said, but these were not my main concerns at that time. So I waited for the Taoist to finish reading the 7 volumes of Tomes of Arcane before returning to the West Hill Divine Palace with him. Who is that Taoist? After a few years, that Taoist entered the Divine Hall of Light and became the great Divine Priest of Light. The headmaster glanced at Sang Sang and said, just like her teacher, they are both admirable, but also not admirable. They are so stubborn that it makes people not know whether to laugh or cry. Ning Ke thought of a possibility. He counted the time with his fingers and asked, is it that Divine Priest of Light? Who else could it be? The headmaster shook his head and said, the Divine Hall asked him to preach in the wilderness, so he went. If he wanted to betray the sect, then so be it. However, he ran to the Jishou Abbey and stole the Ming hand scroll. How annoying. Ning Ke said, I remember that Haotian Taoism asked the Divine Priest of Light to bring the Ming hand scroll to the wilderness. The headmaster said sarcastically, Haotian Taoism is best at saying things that don't embarrass themselves. In fact, when the Jishou Abbey found out that the Tomes of Arcane were stolen, it was a big deal. They even found out that I went to read books with that guy many years ago. I had no choice but to leave the Peach Mountain. Fortunately, the Divine Hall did not pay attention to a nobody like me. After leaving the Peach Mountain, I toured the world. As I said before, the world was chaotic, there were endless wars and darkness. It was much worse than the world now. Haotian Taoism was unified and the Divine Hall was the most powerful. However, they did not care about worldly affairs. Cultivators followed and humiliated ordinary people. The imperial power in the secular world was extremely low and the world was like a plate of loose sand. The only exception is the desolate empire in the wilderness. Because the desolate men are born with strong bodies, cultivators do not dare to be too reckless. That guy stole the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane because he had doubts about Haotian. Therefore, his choice of the wilderness was not unexpected. You should know what happened to that guy later on. He betrayed the West Hill Divine Palace and used the Tomes of Arcane to create the Enlightenment Doctrine, which later became the Devil's Doctrine. Ning Ke was shocked to hear these stories from thousands of years ago. It was not until now that he completely understood why the academy had never been divided into the Devil's Doctrine. Whether youngest uncle or himself joined the devil, the headmaster did not care. He even asked third sister to accept Tang Xiaotang as a disciple. It turned out that the Devil's Doctrine Grandmaster was an old acquaintance of his. There was an old friendship between them. Even to this day, I still think that guy is just messing around. The Devil's Doctrine that he created is so deformed and boring. But I have to admit that his actions at that time caused a great shock in the world. It also indirectly led to some relatively good results. What results? Haotian Taoism was wary of his preaching in the desolate empire, so we had to let the Central Plains be more peaceful. The Divine Hall was slightly purged, so that the common people in the world would have a much better life. Of course, the so-called better life was just that they could live for a few more years and be slightly stronger. If there was a war in the future, they would be able to fight. In fact, the lives of the common people were still extremely bad. They were no better than dogs. People died everywhere in the barren mountains and rivers. After a moment of silence, the headmaster said, "Those who have not experienced the chaos of the past can hardly understand the beauty of the world now. Sometimes, I also find it hard to understand how people can survive such chaos and misery. They can still reproduce and live. I can only say that the vitality of human beings is very terrifying. But I think that people should not live like this. They should not live like beasts. They should not live worse than dogs. We should eat dogs, not be eaten by wild dogs. The headmaster's expression became solemn. He looked at Ning Ke and said, I want to end the chaos in the world. I think that first, there should be some rules and then some benevolence. If it can open people's intellect and trust, then it will be a better result. So I started to teach in the countryside. I want to tell these principles to the world. Ning Ke was silent and listened calmly and attentively. What's annoying is that no one is willing to listen to my lectures. In some places, it's because they're too poor and people worry about eating and drinking every day. They're not in the mood to listen to my lectures. In some places, it's because the Taoist temples don't want me to teach. In other places, it's because the people don't like me teaching because I charge money to teach. You can choose not to charge me money. What can I eat if I don't charge? I have to eat. Teacher, you are really a realistic idealist. I like this compliment very much. Back then, I kept running into walls in reality, but I did not give up on this dream. I just became much more sober and gradually understood that if I wanted to influence the whole world, it was meaningless no matter how strong I was. I needed a strong secular regime or a religion like Taoism to help me. At this time, I was teaching in Xianyang Tuwei, west of the Wei River. A young man came to me in the middle of the night after listening to my lecture. I thought he wanted to be my disciple, so I asked him to go to the east of the Tuwei and get 3 pounds of meat. I did not expect that he did not come to be my disciple, but to recruit subordinates. To put it simply, that night, the young man talked about his dream. I found that his dream was to end the chaos. So I liked it and continued listening. You became his subordinate just like that? How could I become someone else's subordinate? I just promised to help him. Teacher, that young man, his surname is Li, right? Yes. The black horse carriage had left the Peach Mountain and arrived at Chang'an. The desolate man was strong and the West Hill Divine Palace could not fight against them with only cultivators. So they began to restore order in the world. The armies of various countries gradually grew and the imperial power gradually rose. The Tang Empire took this opportunity to accumulate its strength. Then it experienced several years of favorable weather and gradually became stronger. That was how it managed to build Chang'an. The headmaster looked at the 1,000-year-old city outside the window and thought of the scene when the city was built. He showed a nostalgic expression and said, when I built this city, it should be the happiest days of my life. Ning Ke looked at the giant bricks and moss on the wall of Chang'an. He thought of how he had once sighed about this magnificent city and how he had been shocked by the greatness of the predecessors who built Chang'an. He could not help but be speechless. Ever since the headmaster began to tell the story, he was often speechless. When you found that the most legendary and greatest years in the history of the world, the glory that could not be washed away by the wind and rain, you could only use silence to express your inner shock. After a long time, Ning Ke came to his senses and murmured, Chang'an was built by you. Naturally, the God-stunning array was built by you. The headmaster said, Yen Sei gave you the array but some Taoists in the Southern Gate Temple were not convinced. This array was originally mine, so it was natural to pass it to you. Ning Ke said, of course, of course. What happened after that? Later, the Tang Empire began to conquer other countries and was ready to unify the world. Why did they not succeed? They were invincible in the world, but there was still the West Hill Divine Palace. Teacher, you didn't do anything? How can someone like me do anything? Not doing anything is the biggest deterrent. Alright, I admit that I was strong back then, but not strong enough. At least, I was not confident that I could destroy the West Hill Divine Palace and suppress all its disciples without alerting Haotian. Teacher, for you to be able to say such words, you are already very powerful. At that time, the truly strong ones in the world were the desolate man. That guy had been preaching in the wilderness for many years. The devil's doctrine flourished and was ready to go south. The Tang Empire was located in the north and bore the brunt of the attack. There was no way to avoid the desolate man and was forced to send troops deep into the wilderness. I also fought with that guy. Who won? I did not like to fight as much as your youngest uncle. I did not fight many times, but I never lost. Heavens, I think of a movie title, I Am Legend. I rub my hands. I really like to write such things. I will finish with 3 chapters today, and 3 more tomorrow. Please vote for me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 692. They hadn't seen Chang'an for a long time. The black horse carriage traveled slowly on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. Ning Ke and Sang Sang lifted the curtains and looked at the familiar street view. Just like under the divine palace of the mausoleum, no one in Chang'an noticed the black horse carriage, as if they couldn't see it at all. From the Vermilion Bird Avenue to the east, the buildings gradually became shorter, and they arrived at the eastern city. The horse carriage entered the long-awaited Lin 47th Street and stopped in front of the old brush pen shop. The quarrel between Mr. Wu and his wife still echoed in the fake antique shop next door. There were still oil stains left by the hot and sour noodle slice soup stall at the entrance of the alley. With a creak, the door of the old brush pen shop opened. Ning Ke and Sang Sang led the headmaster into the backyard to rest. They heard a cat meow and a shadow flashed over the wall. He looked at the wall and smiled. Then he went to the well to fetch water and cleaned up with Sang Sang for cooking. This was the first time the headmaster came to the old brush pen shop, so he had to have a proper meal. A few simple dishes of vegetables and meat were quickly prepared and placed on the table in front of the shop. The headmaster took a few bites with his chopsticks and showed a satisfied expression. Sang Sang, who was very nervous, heaved a sigh of relief. After the meal, Sang Sang stood behind the headmaster and massaged his shoulders. The atmosphere was very peaceful and comfortable. However, Chang'an in midsummer was always annoying. Ning Ke took a fan and stood in front of the headmaster. As he fanned, he asked, "Why didn't you take the Ming hand scroll back?" The headmaster said, "When I was reading in the Jishou Abbey, I didn't think about stealing it. Naturally, I wouldn't take it back now. I thought it would be good to leave it for that guy's disciples. Later, when your youngest uncle destroyed the devil's doctrine, I didn't want Haotian Taoism to take it back, so I took it back." They didn't stay in the old brush pen shop for too long. After drinking tea, the headmaster left with the two and continued to wander in the horse carriage. As they strolled, they arrived at the northern city of Chang'an and could vaguely see the imperial city. It was midsummer, and the heat in Chang'an was unbearable. There were not many people on the street, but the trees were very lively. They were lush and luxuriant. It was very beautiful against the palace walls. After the Tang Empire defeated the Empire of the Desolate, the West Hill Divine Palace had no choice but to acknowledge the status of this country and acquiesce to its uniqueness. The other countries were influenced by the Tang Empire and began to revise their laws. Haotian Taoism and cultivation sects gradually returned more power to the hands of ordinary people. The headmaster looked at the imperial palace not far away from the window. After a moment of silence, he said, "This is a very good thing. Ordinary people don't know how to cultivate Taoism and have less awe. Instead, they can find a way to balance the conflict of interests. However, ordinary people also have one drawback, and that is that they age too easily and their lifespans are too short. Emperor Li is good at strategy and military command, but he is an ordinary person after all. He will also grow old, and when he is old, he is easily confused, and sometimes his ideas will conflict with mine. During those years, I built an academy in the south of Chang'an and studied there. I didn't want to see him, lest he got angry. Ning Ke was curious about how the story of the founding emperor of the Tang Empire and the headmaster of the academy would develop. He asked, what happened next? The headmaster said, later on, Emperor Li was really muddle-headed. I don't know where he heard the rumor that in order to live forever, he needed to eat my flesh. He actually wanted to deal with me. Ning Ke asked worriedly, then what did you do? The headmaster said, Hao Tian wanted to eat me, but I didn't let it, let alone Emperor Li. When he wanted to deal with me, I went into the imperial palace and killed him. Ning Ke said in shock, you killed him just like that? What else can I do if I don't kill him? Did you want the 3 departments to hold a trial and sentence him to death by 1,000 cuts? Teacher, that's not what I meant. Anyway, the first emperor of the Tang Empire was killed by me just like that. Although I didn't feel sad, I still felt a little regretful. So I thought of an idea, I will teach the new emperor. In this way, even if the new emperor is confused, he will not want to eat my flesh. Ning Ke thought that this was probably the historical reason why the academy had such a high status in the Tang Empire. The new emperor is a very filial child. Very good. The headmaster stroked his beard and said with satisfaction. Ning Ke thought silently, teacher, you killed his father and could kill him at any time and set up a new emperor. What else could poor Emperor Taizong do except to be filial to you? The subsequent emperors of the Great Tang were all outstanding, and the bloodline of the Li clan was something to be proud of. After everything was on the right track, a lazy person like me naturally didn't want to bother with the matters of the court. From then on, I never stepped into the imperial palace again. The headmaster's gaze passed through the window, through the lush green trees, through the hot golden river, and fell on the vermilion palace wall. He looked calm, but deep in his eyes, there was a hint of sadness. The black horse carriage slowly moved away from the imperial palace. When it reached the bustling area, it moved forward under the lazy gaze of the shop assistants and stopped in front of a shop named Chenjinji Cosmetics Store. The headmaster walked into Chenjinji Cosmetics Store and bought a big box of powder for Sang Sang. Teacher, why do you spoil her so much? Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang's small face, which was covered with powder, and could not help laughing. He said, my Sang Sang is becoming whiter and whiter. Sang Sang bowed her head shyly and thanked the headmaster. The headmaster smiled and waved his hand, indicating that he did not mind. The black horse carriage left Chenjinji Cosmetics Store and continued southward on the straight and spacious Vermilion Bird Avenue. This time, the carriage passed by the famous Vermilion Bird stone painting. The wheels of the carriage rolled over the flagstones. The tourists from the Tang Empire were looking at the Vermilion Bird painting under the scorching sun with umbrellas. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew and they squinted their eyes. Amidst the wind, the eyes of the Vermilion Bird painting moved slightly, as if it was coming to life. But after a moment, it lost all its liveliness, as if it had lost its soul. In the dark carriage, a little bird with a bright red body suddenly appeared. The little red bird moved around on the floor, and its movements were a little clumsy. It looked very cute, but its red feathers seemed to contain a very scary power, which made people shudder. Chirp chirp. The little red bird walked in front of the headmaster and chirped twice. The headmaster stretched out a finger and gently touched its head. The little red bird rubbed against the headmaster's finger and turned, looking very happy. This is the Vermilion Bird? Along the way, Ning Ke had heard and seen many shocking things. Now he knew that Cheng and City and even the God-stunning array were all his headmaster's tricks. At this time, when he saw the Vermilion Bird suddenly appear in the black horse carriage, he was still shocked but not panicked. He imitated the headmaster and carefully tried to touch the legendary Vermilion Bird. The little red bird suddenly turned around and stared into Ning Ke's eyes. It looked very dignified, with vigilance, disgust, contempt, and disdain in its eyes. Ning Ke recalled the time when he and Sang Sang held the big black umbrella and looked at the Vermilion Bird painting in the rain. He also recalled the time when he was seriously injured and lying under the Vermilion Bird painting. He hurriedly tucked the big black umbrella under his buttocks. The little red bird turned its head to look at Sang Sang, and its eyes suddenly became very confused. The black horse carriage drove out of the south gate of Chang'an and headed for the academy. Ning Ke had followed this road to the academy to study and cultivate in countless mornings over the years. He was very familiar with the scenery on both sides of the road, so he looked away after a few glances. He wanted to ask the headmaster about the changes in the academy over the past 1,000 years, but then he realized that there was no need to ask. The academy could have many deans, but there was only one headmaster. You are the first and current dean of the academy. What have you been doing over the years? If you really don't want to care about the world, why did you come out and take over the academy again? I have been very busy over the past few hundred years. I remember when I was in charge of the library in the Westhill Divine Palace and I liked reading. Now that I have the academy, of course I have to go around the world to collect books, which is very time-consuming. The headmaster said, and don't forget that I have been flying in the sky for so many years to prepare for this. It took me even more years to make up my mind. In the process of traveling around the world, I have searched for the legendary underworld, the edge of the world, for delicious food, and for some people. It took me a lot of time. Ning Ke asked, who are you looking for? The headmaster said, I want to find some people like me. Ning Ke asked, have you found them? The headmaster said, I found the drunkard and the butcher. From them, I learned more about Haotian and the everlasting night. So I wanted to invite them to do something together. Ning Ke asked, they didn't agree? The headmaster nodded and said, yes. Then what did you do? I fought with them. Who won? Ning Ke waved his hand and said, sorry, this is a stupid question. The headmaster sighed and said, of course they couldn't beat me. What annoyed me was that they still wouldn't listen to me. What do you want to do? Ning Ke asked. The headmaster looked at Ning Ke and said, didn't you ask me what I have been doing all these years? Ning Ke nodded. The headmaster said, these years, I have spent most of my time thinking about a problem. Ning Ke asked, what problem? The headmaster said, how to defeat Haotian. It became very quiet in the black horse carriage. Only the headmaster's voice seemed to be floating and falling on the floor. The vermilion bird's scorched footprints were as light as water. This cultivation journey had already revealed the truth. The headmaster and his disciple had discussed more specific problems. However, when this sentence finally appeared so clearly and simply, it was still shocking. Ning Ke was silent for a long time. He raised his head and asked, Master, have you thought of a way? The headmaster said angrily, if I have thought of a way, why am I still in this horse carriage? The first chapter. There are 2 more chapters today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 693. The black horse carriage was on the ground, and the ground was the human world. If the headmaster had already thought of a way to defeat Haotian, he would have left the human world and fought in the sky. He would not be in the horse carriage. I thought for a long time, but I couldn't think of a way. The headmaster said, after a few hundred years, I met someone. His name was Kuhaoran, your youngest uncle. Ning Ke's gloomy mood brightened up when he heard the name of youngest uncle. He was excited because he knew that youngest uncle's great spirit was in him now. The headmaster of the academy said, your youngest uncle has an outstanding aptitude and can be said to be extremely talented. Whether it's cultivation or other things, he can learn them all at once. He has never encountered any knowledge barrier that the Buddhism sect talked about. Correspondingly, this guy's temper is a bit strange. There are many things that he is unwilling to learn. Ning Ke said, I heard from Lotus that youngest uncle only knows Haoran's sword in his life. But Lotus also said that youngest uncle has reached the state of mastering one method and mastering all methods. No matter what his title was, I think there is a limit to the state that killed himself. The headmaster said, back to what happened in the past. When I saw your youngest uncle, my eyes lit up. I thought that my aptitude was too ordinary, so I couldn't think of a way to defeat Haoyan. His aptitude was far better than mine. If he received my careful training, then maybe he could really fulfill my wish. And then? As I said before, your youngest uncle has a strange temper. Is it pride? Isn't pride strange? Teacher, you are quite proud too. I have always been objective and fair. Teacher, we got sidetracked. Your youngest uncle was very proud. I wanted to take him as a student, but he refused. He said that I was not qualified to take him as a student. I asked him, if I was not qualified, who else in the world was qualified to be his teacher? The headmaster said, at that time, your youngest uncle answered that no one in the world was qualified to be his teacher. His teacher could only be himself. I was a little unhappy at first, but then I realized that he was right. Wasn't I also self-taught? But I still wanted him to take fewer detours on the path of cultivation, so I said that I would accept a disciple on behalf of my master. He asked who our master was, and I told him that we didn't have a master, so he agreed. After a short pause, the headmaster continued, I've always wanted your youngest uncle to take fewer detours on the path of cultivation. But later on, I realized that this method of education was indeed problematic. Ning Ke asked confusedly, what problem? The headmaster said, he didn't take any detours. He walked too fast and could fly at any time. This sentence was difficult to understand, but Ning Ke understood it. Your uncle master's realm increased too quickly. I began to feel uneasy, so I continued to travel the world. I met your eldest senior brother in a small town, and then I accepted Junimo. After that, your youngest uncle left the academy on a donkey. He first entered Chang'an and wandered around the world. Then, he destroyed the devil's doctrine and finally returned to the academy. He grew at an unimaginable speed. Everyone thought that destroying the devil's doctrine with a single sword was your youngest uncle's peak state. In fact, after he returned to the academy, he became even more powerful. He finally experienced the same distress as me and had the same doubts about the sky. So he decided to fight with Haoyan. I objected and told him that he couldn't defeat Haoyan. But he told me that he wouldn't know if he could win without a fight. Senior brother, of course, this kind of thing should be discussed after a fight. Ning Ke lowered his head in silence. He thought about the second brother's way of speaking and doing. He did have some of the youngest uncle's spirit. Then he looked up at the headmaster and asked calmly, and then? The headmaster was silent for a moment and said, and then he went to fight. And then he lost. And then he died. After saying these 3 sentences, the headmaster smiled. His smile seemed a little lonely and desolate. Ning Ke was far away from the spiritual world of the headmaster and the youngest uncle, but he could feel the headmaster's emotions at this time. The more powerful a person was, the lonelier he would be. The drunkard and the butcher were not the same kind of people. The headmaster finally met a like-minded younger brother in the mortal world. But they didn't have the chance to fight side by side, so they parted ways. The headmaster calmed down and said, after that, I put all my energy into teaching your eldest brother and second brother. I summed up some principles with my experience and past in the human world. I taught Man with benevolence and righteousness and Junmo with etiquette. They didn't disappoint me and learned very well. Unfortunately, they were learning from me. No matter how well they learned, they could only be the second me or the second Kuhaoran. There was not much hope for them to defeat Haoyan. She was your third sister. Her cultivation was different from others, but she was still in the cultivation world of Haoyan. So I began to think about other possibilities. I traveled around the world and looked for the most talented people in various fields. I let them go back to the academy to study, such as your fifth brother Song Qian and Wang Qi, but this time, I didn't try to let them climb on the road of cultivation. Instead, I let them study their hobbies and try to find a way to break the world of Haoyan in the world of numbers and lines. When I was in the West Hill, I told you that the starting point of my cultivation was Haotian Taoism. So I set my eyes on Haotian Taoism again. Your 12th brother Chen Pipi was a rare genius of Haotian Taoism. He had the best characteristics of Haotian Taoism, but he was not stale at all. So I chose him. Unfortunately, the time was too short. Now it seems that my attempts may not succeed. Even if there is a possibility, I can't see it. Fortunately, I still have you. Ning Ke had been listening quietly. Until he was mentioned, he looked up in surprise and said, "Headmaster, my cultivation talent is much worse than Chen Pipi's. If we talk about talisman Taoism, mathematics, or chess, I am not qualified to be compared with my senior brothers and sisters. Why did you choose me? First of all, because you are a very selfish person." "Headmaster, are you praising me or belittling me?" The headmaster said, 1,000 years ago, I educated the world with benevolence and righteousness, solidified morality with etiquette, and reduced chaos with law. Now, whether it is the Tang Empire or your 2 senior brothers, they can all practice these perfectly. However, these can only allow the peaceful survival of human society, but cannot produce a strong enough destructive power. Only selfishness can drive human beings forward. Ning Ke said, "I have only heard of love saving the world, but I have never heard of selfishness saving the world." The headmaster said, "Sometimes, destroying the old world is saving the new world." Ning Ke sighed and said, "You put me under a lot of pressure." The headmaster laughed and then gradually stopped. He looked at him quietly and said, "Of course, the most important reason why I chose you as my last disciple is that I can never understand you." Wei Guangming saw a little boy in Chang'an on the Peach Mountain. "Of course, I saw it too. He thought you were the wife of Yama, but I don't think so. But I really can't understand how there can be a person in the world who was born with knowledge. And you look so ordinary." The headmaster said, "It was not until recently that I was finally sure that you are not from the world of Haotian. You are from another world." Then I got the answer. Just like how to defeat Haotian, the fact that Ning Ke was a time traveler was not mentioned during the journey. But the headmaster and he had already tacitly accepted it. Ning Ke looked down at the scorch mark left by the vermilion bird on the floor and was silent for a long time. Then he looked up at Sang Sang. He had nothing to worry about when it came to the wisdom of the headmaster. The headmaster would definitely not think that he was a monster and directly suppress him. But what about Sang Sang? What would Sang Sang think? Sang Sang did not think of anything. She was a little surprised, but there was no fear or repulsion. She just looked at Ning Ke curiously. When Ning Ke looked at her, she smiled. Ning Ke's heart warmed. He did not care that Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama. He only cared that Sang Sang was Sang Sang. Sang Sang did not care which world he was from. As long as he was himself, that was enough. "I have not found a way to defeat Haotian yet. Your youngest uncle did not succeed. No one in this world has ever succeeded. That is because this is Haotian's world." The headmaster looked at Ning Ke and said with a smile, "But you are not from the world of Haotian. At least your soul and your thoughts are not the original creatures of this world. If this world is a dead end of the cycle of life, death, and light, and you are an outsider, then you are the one to break it. That is very good." Ning Ke had previously said that he was under a lot of pressure. Hearing these words, he finally felt the real pressure. He subconsciously looked at the clouds outside the window and looked at the azure sky. Suddenly, he felt that the whole sky had become something incomparably heavy, pressing down on his consciousness and heart to the point that they were about to break apart. Was he going to go against heaven? It was an interesting story in novels for the weak to say that they wanted to go against heaven. But for the headmaster, who had been quiet in the human world for thousands of years, thinking hard and trying to break the blue sky and let the world breathe fresh air, it was not a story, but the most vivid and heroic struggle. Ning Ke was a very selfish person. He had never thought about fighting for anything except a few things. But at this moment, he suddenly found that he had to fight for the liberation of all mankind. What does it have to do with me? That was what he was thinking, but he couldn't say it. Just as the headmaster said, he was not from this world. But he came to this world and felt so much sadness, pain, parting, anger, joy, and happiness. Why did all this happen? Everything had a reason. Life had a purpose. But this reason, this purpose, was so heavy that he could not bear it. He raised his head and looked at the headmaster quietly. He was silent for a long time. Just when the headmaster and Sang Sang thought that he was going to refuse or escape, Ning Ke asked, "How can I be as strong as you?" There is one more chapter. Keep working. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 694. How to defeat Haotian and how to be as powerful as you seem to have nothing to do with each other. But in Ning Ke's eyes, cultivators had to be as powerful as the headmaster to be qualified to go against heaven and to explore those esoteric questions. How did the headmaster cultivate? This was definitely difficult to simply imitate or learn, but he could ask for guidance, just like his youngest martial uncle back then. He could avoid some detours. Some people say that life is a form of cultivation. Although it sounds sour, it's the truth. The longer you live, the higher your cultivation will be. My cultivation talent is also very ordinary. It's just that I've lived a bit longer. The headmaster said, "How can you be as powerful as me?" First, you have to learn to fight against time, one of the two most powerful rules of Haotian. You have to live as long as possible. The longer you live, the higher your state will be, and the longer you can live. It's an endless cycle. Ning Ke said, "Teacher, what you said is as good as nothing." The headmaster said, "That's what I did, so that's all I can say." Ning Ke looked at the wrinkles on the headmaster's face and asked, "Teacher, you are the most powerful person in the world. You can fly above the clouds and live forever. Strictly speaking, you are not an ordinary person, but even beyond the scope of human beings. You can be like the drunkard and the butcher, enjoying your time quietly and quietly. Why do you have to go against heaven? For the human world? First, we have to understand something. If the world is monotonous, limited, and boring, then the longer you live, the more boring you will be. Only an infinite world can bring infinite joy. I have seen all the sceneries in the world and eaten all the delicacies in the world. My life in the world of Haotian is already boring, so I naturally want to break out of the sky and see other sceneries. This is what I said before. The headmaster said, "Secondly, you said that I am beyond the scope of human beings and should not be in the mood to find a new paradise for the human world to satisfy their curiosity. Many years ago, I also wondered if I could still be considered a human. To confirm this, I did something." "What was it?" Ning Ke asked. The headmaster said, "I ate a mouthful of human flesh and found that it didn't taste good. To be more precise, I was disgusted. I kept vomiting, and even vomited out the water in my stomach." Ning Ke lowered his head and said, "Human flesh does not taste good, but what does it have to do with your doubts?" The headmaster said, "The old yellow bull likes to eat peony fish, and the big black horse likes to eat mutton, but the old yellow bull never eats beef. I believe the big black horse will not eat horse meat either, because the old yellow bull is a bull, and the big black horse is a horse. I am interested in all kinds of meat in the world, except for human meat, because I am a human." It was a simple but illogical statement. However, it was filled with the power of intuition and could not be questioned. The headmaster continued, "Since I'm still a human, living in the human world, of course I have to be a human. Many people in Haotian Taoism are different. They think that they are the people of Haotian. They will only stay in the human world for a short time and will eventually return to the embrace of Haotian. Therefore, they walk the way of heaven. This is the difference between me and them." At this time, the black horse carriage had already arrived at the academy. Among the green meadow, heat-resistant flowers were in full bloom. The scenery looked very beautiful, and one could vaguely see the back of the mountain in the fog. The headmaster did not intend to return to the back of the mountain of the academy. He let the big black horse continue forward. Ning Ke heaved a sigh of relief and laughed happily. The headmaster glanced at him and asked, "What are you so happy about?" Ning Ke waved his hand and did not explain. He was happy because the headmaster did not return to the academy. If he did not return to the academy, he would not bid farewell to the disciples in the back of the mountain. This also meant that the thing that he was most worried about would not happen. The black horse carriage went all the way to the north. The conversation between Ning Ke and the headmaster continued. "You are already so powerful, why can't you defeat Haotian? As I said, this is the world of Haotian. It is the rule of the world. Cultivators who can surpass the 5 states can have their own rules, but those rules are always under the original rules of the world." The headmaster said, "In this world, every flower, grass, tree, wood, smile, and thought are all under its gaze. Even cause and effect cannot escape its calculation. For example, Lotus thinks that he can jump out of the 3 realms, but in fact, he has always been in this mountain." At this point, the headmaster glanced at Ning Ke's waist and then at Sang Sang. He said, "As for me, even though I can ignore the rules of Haotian and be unrestrained, I cannot transcend the cause and effect that Buddha once said. Cause and effect is the order of things, and the order of things is time. Time represents everything. In this world, Haotian knows everything, so it is omnipotent. It can calculate and arrange everything, but we cannot predict and avoid it in advance. This is the so-called unpredictable and inviolable heaven's will." Ning Ke asked, "Since Haotian is omnipotent, why can't it kill you?" "Of course it has tried. Thunder and lightning, torrential rain, and the roaring sea. I have seen more wrath of heaven in my life than all cultivators combined." The headmaster said, "But I run fast." After saying this, the headmaster waved his sleeves, and the chi of heaven and earth around the black horse carriage changed slightly. Ning Ke's senses were extremely sharp. Now that he had entered the knowing destiny state, even the slightest change in the chi of heaven and earth could not escape his senses. He instantly sensed that the chi of heaven and earth was divided into many layers, and there was a very faint and smooth space between 2 layers. The human world is covered by the chi of heaven and earth, and it has its own layers. Perhaps because this world is distorted, there are some distorted passages in the layers of the chi, which can allow people to travel thousands of miles away in an instant. The headmaster said. Ning Ke said, "This is the limitless state." The headmaster said, "Yes. If you enter the limitless state, it will be more difficult for Haotian to kill you. The problem is that you can't always escape, or you will die of exhaustion. So you have to think of other ways. I have said that I have no other strengths except for living longer. But because I have lived long enough, my state is getting higher and higher, so high that I can't learn from it. I can only explore by myself. Fortunately, I have found some ways to make it harder for Haotian to find me. I gave up this body and didn't jump out of the 3 realms. I went straight to the human world and integrated myself with it. If Haotian wants to kill me, it will destroy the world. But it is the rule of the world. If the world doesn't exist, it will be destroyed. So it can only find me and invite me to fight in heaven. This is a very dangerous method, because as long as it finds a part of me, it will be able to find me. However, this is also the safest method, because I am everywhere. As long as my body does not appear, it will never be able to find me." Ning Ke thought for a long time and then said, "Although I still don't understand, I feel that it is very powerful." The black horse carriage came to the bank of the Sisui River. The willows were green, and the houses on the other side were quite new. Ning Ke and Sang Sang sat beside the headmaster, enjoying the scenery and resting under the shade of the willows. The story of Haotian and the headmaster was finished, but there was a very important character that was never mentioned. Ning Ke asked, "What kind of existence is Yama?" The headmaster said, "There is no Yama." Ning Ke was stunned. He turned to the headmaster and repeated, "There is no Yama?" The headmaster said, "I have been to many places and seen many sceneries, but I have never seen the underworld. Since there is no underworld, there is no Yama." Ning Ke's mind was a little confused. He said, "How can there be no Yama? Isn't the underworld going to invade the human world?" The light of Buddha array in the Lank temple and the many celestial artifacts left by Buddha were to deal with Yama. The headmaster said, Buddha wanted to suppress Yama. In this sense, his response before Nirvana was indeed reasonable. But in the end, he didn't know who Yama was. Ning Ke was more and more confused. He pointed to Sang Sang, who was picking willow branches to weave trinkets, and said, "She is the daughter of Yama. If there is no Yama, how can she exist?" The headmaster turned to him and said with a smile, "Silly boy, it has come to this. Do you really not understand, or do you not want to think in that direction?" The headmaster's smile was very gentle, and the expression in his eyes was very calm. But Ning Ke's heart suddenly tightened. His eyelids began to twitch, and his legs became as soft as willow branches, as if they were going to collapse. Countless drops of sweat gushed out from every part of his body like starch, instantly drenching his black academy uniform. The great spirit in his body showed signs of collapsing because of the extreme emotional tension. Ning Ke felt that his mouth was dry. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't make a sound. The headmaster looked at Sang Sang, who was weaving willow branches, and rubbed her head. He said, "Don't forget, before she became the daughter of Yama, who was chased by the human world, she was the daughter of light." Sang Sang looked up at the headmaster, not understanding what he was saying. "In fact, she has always been the daughter of light." The headmaster patted Ning Ke's shoulder and said calmly, "In other words, she is the daughter of Haotian. She is the incarnation of Haotian. You can even think of her as Haotian." Sang Sang understood this sentence, but she couldn't understand it. She felt inexplicably uneasy, and her little face suddenly became extremely pale, even whiter than the cosmetics on her face from Chenjinji Cosmetics Store. Ning Ke's face was paler than hers. At this time, he could finally speak, and his voice was particularly hoarse and trembling, "But they all say that she is the daughter of Yama." The headmaster said, "I have said many times that there is no underworld, and naturally there is no Yama. If there is, then it is just like what Buddha thought, then Haotian is Yama." Ning Ke lowered his head, buried it between his knees, and said, This doesn't make sense. This is the simplest truth, and even a child who just entered the school can understand it. In fact, I should have understood it long ago, but the truth is too simple. Absolute light is absolute darkness." The headmaster's gaze fell on the clear blue sky through the willow branches, and he praised, "The great way is the simplest." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.